Welcome to Mr. Geronimo, where every story hides a secret. Subscribe, like this video, and comment your location. Let's get started. There is a line drawn on an old map in the bottom drawer of my desk, and for a long time I have not told anyone what it means. It is a hand-drawn map, folded so many times that the creases have gone soft as cloth. A woman named Alexander drew it more than 60 years ago, back when the place it shows still had living people in it. Most of the map is ordinary: a creek, a wagon road, small squares for houses, each with a name beside it. But there is one line, pressed heavier than the rest, curving along the low ground below the burying ground, and beside that line she wrote 4 words in pencil: "Speak to no one, not do not enter, not turn back, speak to no one." I carried that map into Bledsoe Hollow on the 9th of August with 6 people who trusted me to bring them home. I want to be honest with you before I go any further. I brought 2 of them out. To this day I am not certain that one of those 2 was the person whose name they answered to. My own name does not matter, and by the end you will understand why I keep it to myself. What matters is that I wore the green and gray of the Forest Service for 31 years, and that for most of those years the high district above Bledsoe was closed ground. Not closed for its beauty. Closed because the old mine works under the ridge had gone soft, and the ground there could open under a boot without warning, and because the families who had once lived in the hollow had asked, a long time ago, that their burying ground be left in peace. Norman Alexander was the reason the gate opened that August. He was 74 years old, and he walked into the district office in the last week of July with that same folded map in his coat pocket, and he set it on the counter and said he had been born in the hollow. He said his people had lived there until the water and the work both dried up in the early years, and that the community had scattered down into the valley towns and never gone back. He said he was the last one still living who remembered the place with his own eyes, and that he wanted to stand in it one more time before he could not stand at all. He asked for an escort because he knew the rules, and because he was too old to be told no gently. I should have told him no anyway. I have thought about that every day since. Instead, I looked at the map, and at the old man, and at the careful pencil line that curved below the graves, and I asked him what the 4 words meant. "Speak to no one." He folded the map back up before he answered. He said, "My grandmother drew that. She was born in the hollow too. She used to say that when you pass the burying ground you speak to no one, you answer to no one, and above all you never let it hear your name." He said it plainly, the way a man says a thing he has said 1,000 times without ever once laughing at it. I asked him what it was. He said, "I do not know what it is. I only know the rule." There were 6 of them in the end. Norman, of course, and his sister Irene Griffin, who was 65 and had been a baby the year the family left, so young that she remembered none of it and had spent her whole life listening to her brother remember it for her. She had come, she told me, mostly to watch Norman get what he wanted before the end. There was something tender and tired in the way she looked at him that I have not forgotten. There was Alvin Jenkins, 68, who had grown up 2 valleys over and had hunted this country as a young man before it was closed, and who did not believe one word of Norman's grandmother and said so, and who brought a rifle into the hollow anyway, because a man who has hunted his whole life does not walk into deep woods with empty hands. I let him bring it. Bears are real in that country, whatever else is or is not. I have asked myself many times whether I would take that decision back. I still do not have an answer I trust. There was Darrell Russell, 59, a friend of Alvin's, loud in the way of men who are frightened of quiet, the kind who fills every silence because silence has teeth for him. He laughed at the map at the trailhead. He laughed at a great many things, right up until the hollow taught him not to. There was Felicia Perry, 46, who was Irene's daughter, and who had come for the plainest and best reason of all, which was that her mother and her uncle were old and the trail was hard and someone younger needed to carry the heavy packs and watch the old knees on the steep ground. She was practical and quiet and good, and I have wished many nights that she had stayed home. And there was Brooke Sanders, 38, the youngest of them, who was no relation to any of them at all. She was recording Norman's story, a small oral history of the emptied communities of the mountains, and she carried a little recorder on a strap and a phone in a waterproof case, and she asked Norman gentle questions on the way up and caught his answers on tape. I have those recordings now. I have listened to them more times than is good for a person. There is a voice on one of them that belongs to none of us, and I will come to that. 7, counting me. We went in 7. The trail up from the gate is not long in miles, but the mountains do not measure themselves in miles. It climbs through second-growth timber and then into the older stuff near the top, and then it drops, all at once, into the hollow, and the drop is where the trouble begins, because the way down runs through the laurel. If you have never walked an Appalachian laurel hell, I do not have good words for it. The rhododendron grows in tangles that close over your head and lock arm in arm on every side, and the trail through it is a tunnel barely wide enough for one. And once you are inside it, you cannot see 6 feet in any direction that is not the trail itself. People have gone off the trail in the laurel and never found it again, and been found years later, 100 yards from where they lost it. It turns you around. It is not haunted. It does not need to be. It is just built to swallow you, and it will. Norman went first because he knew the way, and he stopped at every fork and every joining of the paths and did a small thing that I want you to remember. He took a twist of paper from his coat, and he shook a thin line of salt across the mouth of the wrong path, the one we were not taking. Ordinary table salt. He did it without ceremony, the way you might mark a trail with a broken branch, and when Darrell asked him what in the world he was doing, Norman said only, "So it knows which way we did not go." Darrell laughed. "Of course he did. Before I take you down into the hollow itself, let me say one thing to you. The one who is listening to me right now. You have not yet touched that button below, the one that tells this channel you came and you stayed. I can feel it, the way you feel a held breath in a quiet room. Do it now, while there is still light to do it by, while we are still up on the ridge where the sun reaches. Tell the others you were here. Because once we go down under the laurel, I cannot promise that either of us will be in any state to remember such small and living things. There. Thank you. Now walk down with me." We came out of the laurel into the hollow near dusk, and the hollow was beautiful, and that was the first thing that was wrong. I had expected ruin, an emptied community, 60 years of forest taking back what people had built, and it was all of that. The houses were gone to their chimney stones, standing up out of the weeds like broken teeth. The wagon road was a green trough in the grass, but the light in the hollow was gold and long and gentle, and the cicadas were singing in the old fruit trees that someone had planted a lifetime ago and that still bore small hard apples, and Irene put her hand to her mouth and said, "Oh, Norman," in a voice full of something I could not name, and Norman just stood there with the low sun on his old face and let the tears run and did not wipe them away. We made our camp on the flat ground where the church had been. You could still find the foundation if you kicked the grass. Norman wanted to be near it, and above us, up the slope maybe 200 yards, in a stand of old cedars that the evening had already gone blue beneath, was the burying ground. You could see the stones from the fire, thin gray slabs, most of them leaning, some fallen. Norman looked up at them a long time while Felicia and I got the fire going. He said quietly, mostly to himself, "They are all still up there, every one of us that died in this hollow. When the families left, they could not afford to move the dead, so we left them." He was quiet a moment, then he said, "My grandmother always said that was the sin of it, not the leaving them." Brooke had her recorder running. She caught all of that. She caught what came after too, because that was when the voice came down off the slope. It came from the direction of the cedars, from the burying ground, thin and far and clear on the still evening air. And it was a woman's voice, old and cracked and kind, and it called one word down into the hollow. It called, "Felicia." Felicia went still with a stick of firewood in her hand. Every one of us turned toward the graves, and I watched Felicia's mouth open, watched the natural thing, the human thing, the answer, start to come up out of her. Because someone had called her name, and you answer when someone calls your name, you have done it your whole life. Norman crossed the whole camp before she could make a sound. He was 74, and I did not know he could still move like that. He put his old hand flat over his niece's mouth, gentle and absolute, and he looked into her eyes and he shook his head once, slowly, and he did not say a word, because the rule was that you do not speak. And up on the slope in the blue under the cedars, something that had called itself with a dead woman's voice stood in the graves and waited to hear whether anyone down in the hollow would answer. No one did, and after a while the cicadas, which had gone silent, began again. No one slept much that first night, and no one spoke of the voice, because Norman asked us not to. He said it plainly once the cicadas had covered us again. He said, "Do not talk about it out loud tonight. It hears better than you think, and I do not want it to know how frightened we are." Alvin opened his mouth to say something reasonable, something about echoes and old women and tired ears, and then he looked up at the cedars on the slope, and he closed his mouth, and he laid his rifle across his knees, and he said nothing at all. Something in Alvin had heard the voice for what it was, even if the front of his mind was not yet ready to say so. We kept the fire high. Norman salted the ground around the camp before he would let anyone lie down. A full circle of it, poured from a paper sack he had carried up for exactly this and nothing else, and I understood then that the salt at the forks had not been a habit or a joke. He had come prepared for this. He had always known. I sat up with him past midnight while the others lay in their bags and pretended to sleep. And in the low voice you use in a sick room, he told me the rest of it. He said that when he was a small boy in the hollow, before the leaving, a man had died, a neighbor, and they had buried him up in the cedars with the others. And on the third night after, the man had come back down into the hollow and stood at the edge of the firelight and called his own wife by her name, in his own voice, over and over, kind and patient, asking to be let in. And the wife had known her husband's voice, had loved it for 40 years, and she had gone to the edge of the light to answer it. I asked Norman what happened to her. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They found her up in the burying ground 3 days later, lying on top of the man's grave. There was not a mark on her, but she was not breathing, and her eyes were open." He looked into the fire. "My grandmother said that whatever comes back down out of those graves, it does not come back for company. It comes back to take your place. It learns your voice by hearing you speak. It learns your name by hearing you answer to it. And once it has both, it can wear you like a coat and walk out of the hollow in your skin, and no one will ever know the difference. That is why you speak to no one. That is why you never let it hear your name. Because a name is a door, and once you give it the key, it will let itself in." He looked at me across the fire. He said, "Do you understand me now, Ranger? We are going home the morning after next. Until then, no one in this camp says another living soul's name out loud. Not once. Not for any reason. If you need to get someone's attention, you touch them. You do not call them. Tell the others in the morning." I told them in the morning. Darrell laughed. I want to be fair to Darrell Russell, because he is dead, or something worse than dead, and the dead deserve fairness. He was not a cruel man. He was a frightened one, and fear in some men comes out as noise, and the quiet of that hollow had been eating at him from the moment we came down under the laurel. He needed it not to be true. He needed the voice to have been an echo, and the salt to have been an old man's nonsense, because if it was true, then he was a 59-year-old man 2 hard days from any road with a thing in the graves above him that wanted to wear his skin, and that was more than Darrell could carry. So he laughed. He said it out loud, everything Norman had told us to keep behind our teeth. He said, "This is Darrell Russell, and I am standing right here, and I am not afraid of a story." He said his own name to the hollow loud on purpose, to prove that nothing would happen. Nothing happened. That was the terrible thing. Nothing happened at all, and the sun came up gold over the ridge, and the cicadas sang, and we ate, and we walked the old town site, and Brooke recorded Norman naming the houses one by one, whose family had lived in each pile of stones, and it was a good day, a gentle day, and by the afternoon even I had begun to believe that the voice had been an old woman's ghost of a memory, and nothing more. That afternoon, Brooke did a thing that seemed harmless. She had recorded the whole of the evening before, and she wanted to check the tape, to make sure Norman's voice naming the houses had come through clean. She sat on a chimney stone with her little recorder and her headphones, and she went back through the tape, and I watched her face change. She took the headphones off. She was very pale. She did not say anything for a moment, because she was a smart woman, and she had already understood that saying certain things out loud in that hollow was not safe. Instead, she waved me over, and Norman, and she held the recorder out flat on her palm, and she turned the volume down low, so low that we had to lean our heads together over it, and she played us the part of the tape from the moment the old woman's voice had called down off the slope. We heard it again on the tape, Felicia, thin and far and cracked and kind. We heard the long silence after, the silence where none of us had answered, where Norman had his hand over his niece's mouth. And in that silence, in the pause where no living person made a sound, the recorder had caught something the still evening air had carried too soft for our ears. A second voice, close, much closer than the graves, close as the edge of the firelight, and it had answered the old woman, quiet and wet and patient, and what it said, on the tape, in the silence where no one spoke, was, "Not yet. They have not said their names yet." Norman reached over and turned the recorder off with one finger. He did not explain it. He did not need to. He looked at me, and then he looked up the slope at the cedars in the honest gold light of the good day, and he said, so quietly that the tape would never have caught it, It was standing right there at the fire with us last night, and we did not know. Brooke did not play the tape again, but she did not erase it either, and I am glad, in a bitter way, that she did not, because it is the one piece of that hollow I carried out that another living person can hold in their hand and hear. I have it still. When people tell me that I imagined all of it, that grief and fear will make a person hear things that are not there, I think about the tape, and the second voice, and the words it said in the silence where no one spoke, and I do not argue with them. I let them believe the easy thing. I only hope they never have their own reason to believe the other one. We should have left at first light. Instead, we stayed the second night, because Norman wanted one more evening in the place he was born, and because the day had been so kind that we forgot to be afraid. I have learned since that this is exactly how the hollow does it. It does not frighten you out. It lulls you in. It gives you a good day so that you will stay for the bad night. The good day ended the way days end in the mountains, fast, the sun dropping behind the western ridge all at once, and the cold coming up out of the ground to meet it. The fog came with the cold. It rose up out of the low places in the hollow, out of the wet ground below the graves, and it filled the bottom of the hollow the way water fills a basin, slow and white and rising, until the chimney stones stood up out of it like the last things above a flood, and the cedars up the slope seemed to float on top of it, and the firelight reached only a few feet before the fog swallowed it whole. Irene said, in a small voice, that she wished the fog had not come. Norman put another log on the fire and said nothing, and salted the circle again, wider this time, and I saw that his old hands were not quite steady, and that frightened me more than anything the good day had let me forget. The second night, it came down out of the cedars. We heard it before we saw it, not the voice, this time. Footsteps, slow and heavy and wet, in the grass beyond the salt line, circling the camp in the murk past the reach of the fire. And a smell came with it. A smell I have not been able to wash out of my memory, cold and mineral and rotten all at once. The smell of clay from the bottom of a grave. The smell of a root cellar that has had something dead shut up inside it. It circled us. We sat in the firelight in a tight knot, and we did not speak, and we did not answer, and we listened to it walk, around and around, just outside the salt. And Alvin sat with his rifle up and his eyes moving in the black and his jaw so tight I could hear his teeth. And then it began to call. It called in the old woman's cracked, kind voice. It called, Felicia. And when no one answered, it called in a man's voice, low and patient. Irene, Irene, honey, it is only me. And when no one answered that, it began to go through us, one name at a time, in voices that were almost right and never quite. The way a voice sounds when it has learned the shape of a word without ever having felt the word mean anything. It knew our names, every one of them. Darrell had given it his out loud, but the others it had simply listened for, across 2 long days, every time one of us forgot and spoke to another, and now it stood in the lightless grass and it read them back to us like a list, patient, tireless, waiting for just one of us to be human enough to answer. None of us answered. For a long time, none of us answered, but it had said Darrell's name more than any other. It had learned his best, because he had given it freely, and it said his name now in his own voice, in Darrell Russell's own laughing voice, from the black beyond the fire. Darrell, it said, in Darrell's voice, to Darrell's face. And I watched Darrell Russell hear himself called by himself, and I watched something break behind his eyes, some last thread of a man who could not bear one more minute of not knowing, and before any of us could reach him he was on his feet, and he had stepped over the salt line, and he had walked out into the murk toward the sound of his own voice saying, "Darrell, come and see, it is not what you think, come and see." Norman shouted his name. I am sorry to tell you that Norman broke his own rule in that moment, shouted Darrell out loud into the black to try to call him back, and it did no good. Because the thing already had Darrell, had had him from the moment Darrell answered it 2 days before with his own proud living voice. Darrell walked into the laurel at the edge of the hollow, and the branches closed over him, and the wet heavy footsteps followed him in. And then there was a silence that had a shape to it, and then, out of the black, Darrell's voice, calling to us, calling every one of our names now, calling, "Come and see, come and see, it is not so bad. Come and see." And Alvin Jenkins stood up and put his rifle to his shoulder and fired into the sound of his friend's voice. The shot went out across the hollow and came back off the ridges, once, twice, and then the night ate it. And there was a heavy sound in the laurel, the sound of something large falling into the branches. And then, for a moment, blessed quiet. Alvin was shaking. He said, into the quiet, in a voice I had never heard him use, I had to. It was not him anymore. You all heard it. It was not him. And out of the laurel, in Darrell Russell's voice, wet now and low, and no longer laughing at all, the thing we had shot said, "That hurt, Alvin," and it began to walk toward us again. We ran. I know how that sounds. 6 people, and one of them was me, a trained ranger who is supposed to keep his head, and we ran into a laurel hell at night away from our fire and our salt and every safe thing. But you were not there. You did not hear Darrell Russell's dead voice say Alvin's name out of the black after a rifle had already put him down. If you had, you would have run too. There is a kind of fear that reaches into the deciding part of you and simply switches it off, and what is left just runs. Norman did not run. That is the thing I have to tell you, and it is the hardest part. Norman Alexander was 74 years old, and he could not run, and he knew it, and he did the arithmetic of it in about 1 second in the firelight while the rest of us came apart, and he made a choice. He grabbed Brooke by the arm, and he grabbed me, and he pushed us both toward the one path he knew, the path back up toward the laurel tunnel that led to the ridge, and he pressed the folded map into my hand, and he said, fast and low, "Get to the line on the map, the heavy line below the graves. It cannot cross running water, and it cannot cross the salt, and it will not cross that line. My grandmother drew it for a reason. Get across it, and keep going, and do not stop, and do not answer anything, do you hear me, no matter whose voice it wears, do not answer." And then Norman Alexander did the bravest and most terrible thing I have ever seen a man do. He turned toward the black where the walking thing was, and he filled his old lungs, and he shouted his own name into the hollow. He shouted, "I am Norman Alexander. I was born in this hollow. Come and take me. I am the last one who remembers you. Come and take me, and let the young ones go." He gave it his name. He gave it the key to his own door, on purpose, to make himself the loudest and the nearest and the most wanted thing in that hollow, so that it would come for him and not for us. It came for him. I did not see it take him. I am glad of that, and I am ashamed of being glad. What I saw, looking back once as Brooke and I reached the mouth of the laurel, was Norman standing his ground on the church foundation with his arms held a little out from his sides, the way you stand when you have decided not to run. And I saw a shape come out of the murk toward him, and the shape walked wrong, the joints of it going the wrong ways, wet clay of it shining in the last of the firelight. And I saw that it had a face, and I will not tell you whose face, because it had already begun to wear one. And then the laurel closed over Brooke and me, and I saw no more. We lost Irene in the laurel. I do not know how. One moment her daughter Felicia had her by the hand and was pulling her along the black tunnel of the trail behind us, and the next Felicia was screaming without any sound, the way you scream in a nightmare, her mouth open and nothing coming out, because Irene's hand was gone from hers, and somewhere off in the tangle to the left, off the trail, in the place where you must never go, we heard Irene's voice, calm and pleased, saying, "It is all right, Felicia. I found the way. Come this way. Come to me." Felicia went. "Help me. I understand why." It was her mother's voice, and it was calm, and it said it had found the way. And Felicia was tired and terrified, and she wanted her mother, and she let go of the living, and she went off the trail toward the voice, into the laurel, and I caught the back of her jacket, and I held on, and I did not say her name. I only held on. And she pulled against me toward her mother's voice with a strength I could not believe, and the jacket tore in my hand, and she was gone into the black, and her mother's voice said, warm and glad, "There you are." And then there was nothing, and Brooke and I were too. I will not walk you through the whole of that flight. Some of it I do not remember, and some of it I will not say. I will tell you that the salt sack was gone, dropped somewhere in the running, and that when we came at last to the heavy line on the map, the low ground below the burying ground where Norman's grandmother had drawn her 4 pencil words, I did not have 1 grain of it left. Whatever protection the salt had been, we crossed that line without it. We had only Norman's word that the line itself would hold, and behind us in the laurel, they were all calling now, all of them. Darrell and Irene and Felicia and Norman, all of them in their own voices, and the old cracked woman under them all, a whole hollow of the taken, calling our names down the black tunnel of the trail. "Come and see, come this way. It is not so bad, we found the way, come and answer." And I held Brooke's arm, and Brooke held mine, and we did not answer. We did not answer. We crossed the heavy line in the low wet ground, and we climbed up out of the hollow through the laurel with the whole emptied community calling our names behind us, and not once did either of us answer. We came out on the ridge at dawn, The sun was on the high grass. The calling had stopped somewhere below the line, exactly where Norman said it would. We walked down the far side to the gate, and I put Brooke in the truck and I drove us out, and I made the calls that had to be made, and the search that went in after found the camp and the salt circle and Alvin's rifle with one round fired and no bodies at all, 4 grown adults and not one trace of them. And the file on Bledsoe Hollow says lost, presumed drowned in flooded mine works, because that is a thing a person can write down and put in a folder. The truth is not. That is the whole of it, almost. I said at the beginning that I brought 2 of them out, and that I am not certain one of the 2 was who they said they were. I will finish now, and then I will let you go, and you should go. You should go and be with living people tonight, and not sit alone in the black with a story. When we reached the heavy line and the low ground, in the worst of it, with the whole hollow calling behind us, Brooke stumbled. She went down in the wet leaves right at the line, right on it, half across, and she did not get up, and the voices behind us surged. Glad, so glad, and I did the one thing Norman told me never to do. I did it to save her. I grabbed her, and I pulled her across the line, and I said her name. I said, Brooke, get up, Brooke, out loud once, to bring her back to herself, and she came up out of the leaves and across the line, and we ran, and we got out, and I have told myself for 2 years that it did not matter, that we were already across, that the line had already held, but it hurt me. Whatever else is true, it heard me say her name at the very edge, on the line, in the low ground below the graves. And I have wondered every day since whether the person who got up out of those leaves and ran up out of the hollow beside me was the same person who fell. She is alive. Brooke Sanders is alive and well, and she does not remember much of that night, which is a mercy, and she is kind, and she is exactly as I remember her, almost exactly, and I have never once told her why I watch her the way I do. And I have kept my own name out of this whole account, out of every account, off every form I was able to keep it off. Because if a name is a door, then I am not going to stand in the black and hand out my key, not after what I watched a name do to Norman Alexander. I finished writing this down last night, here at the station, with the window open because the summer heat does not let up even after sundown. And a little while ago, from the tree line at the edge of the lot, out past the reach of the light, a voice called my name. It was Norman's voice, kind and old and cracked and glad. It said my name. The name that is on no form and in no file, the name I have given to no one, and it said, come and see, it is not so bad, come this way, we found the way, and it is waiting for me to do the one thing I have spent 2 years not doing. I am not going to answer it, but I want you to understand something before you close this and go back to your warm and living rooms. It knew my name. It should not know my name, and I never said it out loud. The incident form has a single line for the number of persons unaccounted for. I have written a figure on that line and scratched it out 4 separate times because the honest count keeps sliding out from under my pencil, and it slides depending on how many pairs of red lights up on that bald you are willing to call a face. The office wants a number. A number is a clean thing. You put it in the box, you sign under it, you file it, and the mountain goes back to being a shape on a map with a green tint and a dotted trail. I have worked this district a long stretch of years, longer than most men last up here, and I have filed a great many clean numbers. This one will not go clean. So I am going to set it down the way it happened instead, from the front. And if the office does not care for that, they can drive up to the station and read it by the same window I am sitting at now, the one that looks straight out at the ridge where I lost the count. I keep the high station from the last melt in spring to the first hard snow. It is 1 room and a stove and a radio and a rack of forms, set on a shoulder of rock a little below the tree line, where the hardwood gives up and the red spruce takes over and the air turns thin and cold even in the last week of August. Above the station the timber thins again into the grassy balds, those bare green crowns the old people never could explain, mowed flat by no hand anyone ever saw. Below it the mountain falls away in folds of laurel so thick a man can walk on the top of it for 100 feet before he understands he has left the ground. It is beautiful. I want that on the record too, because the office never asks about the beauty. It is the finest country I have ever stood in, and I have watched the sun come up over it 2,000 mornings, and I still would not cross those balds after dusk for any wage a man could name. They signed in at my door on a Friday in the back half of August, 6 of them. In the last good light of the afternoon. I stepped out onto the porch because I heard them before I saw them, the loose gravel talk of boots on the switchback, and one high laugh carried up on the wind. Then they came around the last bend in a line, and I did what I always do, which is to count heads and read them, because reading people is most of this job. You learn fast who will be trouble and who will be dead if you let them past you, and usually it is not the ones they think. The man in front had to be past 70, and he walked like the mountain owed him money. He was lean and dried out the way old timber gets, and he had a face I felt I had seen before, one of those long hollow faces that belong to a family and not to a person. He put out a hand and told me his name was Clifford Hayes and that he had grown up 2 ridges over, in a hollow that did not have a post office anymore. When a man tells you where he grew up before he tells you where he is going, you are dealing with somebody who considers this his own back porch, and you had best listen to him more than he listens to you. Behind him came the oldest of the bunch, a wide, soft man of about 76 leaning on a hickory cane, breathing hard and grinning through it. Melvin Ross. He was deaf in one ear and told me so at once, and told me to shout at him from the left, and told me a joke about his own funeral that I will not repeat because it stopped being funny 2 days later. He was the kind of old man who covers his fear with noise, and he made a great deal of noise, and I liked him for it right away. There was a woman of 62 named Martha Cooper who had packed for a war. She had a rucksack on her that would have bowed a mule, and when I raised an eyebrow she said a body should never go into the high country counting on the weather to be kind, and I told her that was the smartest thing anybody had said to me all season. She had a way of looking at a thing twice, once soft and once hard, and I trusted the hard look. She told me she had kept the county records for 30 years before she retired, and I believe every fact she ever filed was true, because when the bad nights came she was the only one who kept an accurate account of what we had lost. The one I marked as trouble was a squared-off man of 55 named Jerome Ward. He had that flat, steady carriage men keep for the rest of their lives after the service teaches it to them, and he looked at my warning signs the way a man looks at a fence he intends to climb. When I gave the group the standard talk about staying together and turning back before dusk, he was the one who smiled at the ground, and a smile at the ground is the most dangerous thing I meet up here. It means a man has already decided the rules are for other people. 2 women came up last, close together, and they belonged to the middle of things, not old and not young. Tammy Henderson was 42, and she had one hand on old Clifford Hayes the whole time, at his elbow, at the small of his back, the way you steady somebody you love and do not want him to notice you are steadying. She told me Clifford was her uncle, and that she had promised her mother she would get him up there and back. A promise like that is a heavy pack to carry, and I could see she felt every ounce of it. The last was the youngest, Tracy Coleman, 37, and she was the only one of the 6 who did not belong to the mountains at all. She had town written all over her, in her clean boots and her thumb moving on a phone that had not held a signal since the trailhead and would not hold one up here. She kept lifting it to the sky like a diviner looking for water. She was Tammy's friend from work, along for what somebody had sold her as a pretty weekend, and she was the only one of them who was afraid before there was anything yet to be afraid of. I want that on the record too, because of what Clifford told me about fear, and because in the end it mattered more than any pack anybody carried. I signed them in. I asked where they were headed, and Clifford answered for all of them. He said they were going up to the Far Bald, the one my map calls Grief Knob, though no ranger writes that name on a form. He said they went up every so many years, the ones who were left, to remember a boy. Then he told me the boy's name, and the way he said it, slow, like setting down something breakable. Told me the boy had been carried a long way inside him. Ezra Combs, more than 50 years gone. Clifford said he had been 14 the summer Ezra walked up to that bald with a handful of them and did not walk back. He said there had been a search that lasted 11 days and turned up 1 boot and no boy. He said the ones who had been on the mountain that night were down to a small number now, and that the small number came back when they could, because a body ought to be remembered by the place that took him, or he is truly gone. I have heard 100 stories like it. Every high country in this world has a boy who went up and did not come down, and every one of those boys has a legend growing over him like moss. I did not doubt that a boy had died. Boys die on these balds in fog and cold and stupidity every generation, and the mountain does not need any help from a legend to do it. So I gave Clifford the sad nod you give, and I told him I was sorry, and I meant it. It was when the others had gone on ahead to the spring to fill their bottles that Clifford stayed back on my porch and told me the rest, the part he plainly did not say in front of the young ones. He said his granddad had given him 3 rules for that bald, the summer before Ezra, and that he had passed them to Ezra too, and that Ezra had broken the 3rd one. He held up one finger. He said, "If you see 2 red lights sitting low and level in the timber at night, that is a deer, and you leave it be, and it leaves you be, and there is no more to it than that." He held up a 2nd finger. He said, "If the 2 lights sit wider apart than a man can spread his 2 hands, do not run. Running only teaches it how fast you are, and once it has your speed, it has you." He held up a 3rd finger, and his voice went down under the wind, so I had to lean in. He said, "Never walk straight toward a light in these woods, and never walk straight away from one either. It herds you by your fear. It reads a straight line the way you or I would read a white flag." Ezra ran in a straight line for the light he thought was the fire, Clifford said, "and that is the last any living soul saw of him." I asked him about the deer, why a man would fear the eyes of a deer, and Clifford almost smiled. He said the deer was the whole trick. He said you spend your first hour up there telling yourself every pair of red lights is only a deer, until the night you count a pair set too wide, and by then you have taught yourself so well not to be afraid that you walk right toward the thing that has been waiting for exactly that. Then I asked him the natural question. I asked him what the 4th rule was, because a man who counts on his fingers always has a 4th finger waiting, and his hand had stopped at 3. Clifford looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked out at the ridge, and he said his granddad never finished the 4th one. He said the old man would get as far as saying, "And the worst thing you can ever do out there is," and then he would just stop and look at the fire, and no amount of asking ever got the end of it out of him. Clifford said he had spent his whole life not knowing how that rule ended, and that he had come to think maybe the not knowing was the mercy in it. I told him I would keep the radio on. I told him to camp on the near side of the bald and to be back through my door by noon the next day. He shook my hand again, and his grip was dry and strong, and he thanked me. And there was something in his face when he thanked me that I did not understand until much later, when it was far too late to do him any good. He thanked me the way a man thanks you for a thing he already knows you cannot give him. They went up. I watched the line of them thread into the black timber and out onto the open grass above it, 6 small figures leaning into the last of the light, and then the fold of the mountain took them and they were gone from me. I did my evening rounds. I split a little wood. I ate a can of something over the stove, and I told myself the story I had been telling myself for years, which is that the balds are only high ground and cold air and the ordinary bad luck of ordinary people, and that a legend is just grief that has learned to walk. Then, a little after full dusk, I went up to the lookout rail with my glasses out of habit to find their fire and make sure it was where I had told them to keep it. I found it, a small orange bead of flame on the near shoulder of Grief Knob, right where it should have been. Around it I could pick out the little cold blue stars of their headlamps, moving as people move when they set a camp, bending and rising, crossing one another. I counted them the way I count everything. I counted 7. I lowered the glasses and rubbed my eyes, and raised them again, and counted a 2nd time, careful, touching each little light with my attention the way you touch beads on a string. 6 lamps moved together, near the fire, bending and rising, doing the work of the living. And out past them, at the edge where the grass met the black timber, sat a 7th light that did not bend and did not rise and did not cross the others. It sat level. It did not move at all. And it was not the cold blue of a lamp. It was red. The radio in the station behind me came alive with a hiss, a long swelling wash of static like a held breath, and under the static, far down and thin, I was almost sure I heard somebody counting. I did not sleep. I sat by the radio with the volume up and listened to that hiss rise and fall like something breathing on the other end of the line, and twice more under it I heard the counting, a low even voice going 1 and 2 and 3 and never any further, always starting again at 1. It was not a voice I knew. It did not have the shape of any of the 6 I had signed in. I told myself it was a stray signal skipping off the ridges, some trucker or some hunter 40 miles out, the way voices do sometimes climb up here from nowhere. I told myself that until the counting stopped, all at once, in the middle of the word 3, and the silence it left was so complete that I could hear the blood in my own ears. At first gray light I put on my pack and my heavy coat, and I went up. I want to say plainly why I went, because the office will want to know why one man walked up onto that bald alone before dawn, with a legend for a reason. I went because I had counted 7 lights and one of them was wrong, and because there were 6 people up there who had trusted me to keep a radio on, And because in 15 years of this work I had learned that the worst thing a man in my position can do is decide, from the safety of a lit room, that what he saw could not have been what he saw. That is the same error as walking toward the light. It is deciding not to be afraid of the thing that is actually there. The climb through the spruce was cold and blue and silent. There should have been birds. There are always birds at that hour, the small hard chatter of them working the low branches, and there were none. There should have been the far complaint of a jay, and there was none. The whole mountain had the held quality of a room where everyone has stopped talking because of who just walked in, and the one who just walked in was me, or was something ahead of me, and I did not know which, and not knowing which is its own particular fear. I came up out of the black timber and onto the open grass of the near shoulder, a little before the sun cleared the far ridge, and I found their camp. 3 tents stood where they should have stood. The fire was long cold, a gray eye of ash. A pot sat in it, tipped over, its contents spilled and frozen in a brown tongue across the stones. Somebody's boots, a good pair, sat neatly side by side at the mouth of the nearest tent, laced up tight, with the laces tied off in a double knot, and no feet in them, and no tracks leading away from them, as if a person had been lifted straight up out of his own boots, without the boots ever being untied. I have thought about those boots more than about almost anything else I saw. There is no way to take a man from tied boots without loosing the laces. There is no way, and there they were. 4 of them were still alive. They came out of the tents when they heard me call, and I have never in my life been so glad to see frightened faces. Clifford was upright and hard-eyed and holding it together the way the old and the tough do, by turning fear into stillness. Tammy came out with her jaw clenched so tight I could hear her breathing through her teeth. Martha came out with a small notebook already in her hand, and I understood later she had been writing in it all night, keeping the account, because keeping the account was the only thing that let her stay a person. And Jerome came out last, and the flat certainty was gone off him entirely, and in its place was the specific fury of a man who has met a thing his whole life told him was not real. 2 were gone, Melvin Ross and Tracy Coleman, the old man and the youngest, the one who made the most noise and the one who was most afraid. Gone from the middle of a camp, from between a fire and 3 tents, in a single night, without a cry that 4 sleeping people had heard, without a footprint on the frost. I need to stop here for one moment, and I hope you will forgive me, and I hope you are still with me, because what comes next is the part I have never been able to say out loud to another living person, and I would like to know that somebody is there to hear it. If you are listening, take the 1 second it costs and let me know. Tap the like, leave a word below, because I have not seen yet that you are there. And up on that bald I learned exactly what it is worth to be somewhere real and have no one in the world know it. That was the whole of the horror, in the end. Not the eyes, being unwitnessed. So witness me a moment, and I will go on. Martha read me her account in a flat clerk's voice, standing over the cold fire, and it was the worst thing I have ever heard read from a notebook. She said the first night had been ordinary until it was not. They had made their fire and their supper. Clifford had told the boys' story to the grass and the stars the way he did every trip. And a little after full dusk, out at the tree line, 2 red lights had opened, low and level, and Clifford had said the word deer in a voice meant to calm them, and it had calmed them, because that is what the word is for. But Tracy, she said, had not been calmed. Tracy had kept lifting her useless phone toward the lights as if to photograph them, and the small glow of that screen had turned toward the timber like a face turning, and Martha wrote in her notebook. And I am reading you her exact words. The lights moved when the phone moved. She said they had watched the 2 red points for an hour, telling one another it was only a deer, and that the telling had worked so well that they had all gone to their tents. And in the deep middle of the night, the fire had gone out all at once, not died down, but gone out. And in the total black that followed, she had heard, very close, the sound of somebody counting, 1 and 2 and 3. And then Melvin's voice, from his tent, muffled and thick and strange, saying he was coming, hold on, he was coming. And the sound of the old man's cane, tap and tap and tap, going away from the camp, out toward where the lights had been, in a straight line, in the pitch black, toward a thing that was calling him by counting. And Tracy's voice, sharp and awake, saying, wait, that is not the trail, that is not the way. And then Tracy's zipper, and Tracy's boots on the frost going after him, going out to bring the old man back the way a good person does, straight out toward the timber, in a straight line, and then nothing, no cry, no fall. Just the 2 of them walking out toward the red. one because it called him, and one because she went to save him, and the frost closing over the sound of them, and the four who stayed lying frozen in their tents till morning, listening to a silence that had a shape in it. I asked Clifford, standing there in the gray light over the two neat empty boots, why he had not gone after them. It was a cruel question, and I knew it as it left me. But I was frightened, and I needed the world to still make sense. He looked at me, and he was very old in that moment, older than his years, older than the mountain. He said, because I know the rules, he said, if I had gone out in a straight line after them in the black, there would be 3 neat pairs of boots this morning, and no one left to remember any of it. He said, the hardest thing I have ever done in a long, hard life was lie in that tent and let 2 good people walk out into the timber and not follow, because I knew that following was the one thing it wanted from every one of us. He said, it does not take you. It calls, and it waits for you to bring yourself. We should have gone straight down the mountain then, the 5 of us, in the daylight, together, and I have gone over it 1,000 times why we did not, and the answer shames me. We did not go straight down because Jerome would not. Jerome had crossed some line in the night, from the man who did not believe to the man who could not bear to be made a fool of, and now that a thing had reached into the real world and taken an old man and a young woman while he slept, he wanted it. He wanted to see it in daylight and prove it was a bear, a man, a trick, anything that could be shot or arrested or explained. He kept saying they might still be alive, that Melvin was slow and Tracy was young, and maybe they were only lost in the laurel below the bald, and that a man does not leave people in the laurel. And that was true. That was the terrible thing. Every word he said was decent and true, and it led us wrong, so we went to look for them. In the daylight, telling ourselves it was safe in the daylight, we spread into a loose line the way you do for a ground search, and we worked down off the near shoulder into the folds of laurel below the bald, calling their names, and the mountain took our voices and gave us nothing back. I found the cane a little after noon. It was standing upright. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Melvin's hickory cane was standing straight up in the middle of a laurel slick, driven a hand's depth into the black wet ground, upright, like a stake, like a marker, like something set there on purpose to be found. There was no sign of the old man. Around it the laurel was unbroken. A soft, heavy man cannot pass through a laurel slick without leaving a wake in it a blind person could follow, and there was no wake, only the cane, standing up out of the ground in the one open patch, waiting for us to come to it. Jerome saw it, and something in him broke and set at the same time. He walked to that cane and pulled it out of the ground and held it, and he turned in a slow circle looking at the wall of green around us, and he said, in a voice gone strange and loud, "Come on then, come and get me, right here." And the laurel did not answer, and the light came down gray and even, and I felt the fear go up my back like cold water, because I understood that he had just done in the daylight, with his voice, the thing that Ezra had done in the night with his feet. He had walked toward it. He had made himself a straight line pointed right at the timber, and he had told it his speed by telling it he was not afraid. We got him turned around. Tammy and I each took an arm, and Clifford went ahead to break trail, and Martha came behind riding, always riding, and we climbed back up out of the laurel toward the open bald and the way down, and the light was already going. It had taken us the whole short day to lose 2 people and find 1 cane. And now the gray was thickening toward dusk again, and we were still up high, in the last place on earth any of us should have been at that hour. We came up onto the open grass, and the fog was already sitting on the bald. It had come up out of the valleys the way it does in these mountains, fast and total, a white wall that swallows the world down to the length of your own arm. One moment we could see the whole crown of Grief Knob and the black timber ringing it, and the next we could see nothing but each other and the grass at our feet. And the fog was cold and wet, and it smelled, I swear this on the form, it smelled faintly of copper, of blood, of the inside of your own mouth when you have bitten your cheek. And out in that white nothing, off to our left, a light came on, not red, not this time. A small warm yellow light, steady, the exact color and size of a lit window, or a lantern, or the glow of my own station down the mountain. It sat out there in the fog at the distance a rescuer would be, at the distance of safety, at the distance of home. And it was the most beautiful and welcome thing I have ever seen, and every animal part of me wanted to walk straight toward it, and I took a step toward it before I knew I had. Clifford's dry, hard hand closed on my wrist like a trap. He said, very low, "Do not." He said, "That is not the station." He said, "Look at it. It wants you to walk to it in a straight line." And then he turned his old hollow face to me in the fog, and he said the thing that stopped my heart. he said. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I should never have brought them, and I should never have brought you into it. And there is a reason it lets me keep coming back, and the reason is worse than anything out there in the timber. And I am going to have to tell it to you now, while there is still time, because you are going to need to know it to get down off this mountain alive. We put our backs together in the middle of the bald, the five of us, in the white blindness of the fog, with that warm yellow light burning steady off to the left at the exact distance of everything a lost person longs for. And Clifford Hayes told me why the red eyes had let him live. He said it low and fast, close to my ear, while Tammy held his arm, and Martha wrote by feel, and Jerome stood facing the light with the dead man's cane in his two hands like a weapon. He said that the night Ezra died, more than 50 years back, he had not simply survived. He said the two red lights had come for the whole handful of them, and one by one the others had done the human thing, had run or had walked toward what they took for the fire, straight lines every one, until it was only Clifford and Ezra left, two boys back to back the way we stood now. And Ezra had broken and run for the light and been taken. And Clifford, 14 years old, had done the one thing his granddad had drilled into him. He had stood still. He had not run, and he had not walked toward the light, and he had not walked away from it in a straight line. He had stood in the middle of the bald and looked away and waited to die, and it had not killed him. He said the two red lights had come up close to him in the black, so close he could have touched them, close enough that he understood there was no deer behind them and never had been. And then they had simply hung there, level with his own eyes, and looked at him. And in that looking, he said, he had understood a thing without any words being spoken, the way you understand a thing in a bad dream. He had understood that it was not going to take him. He had understood that it was going to let him walk down off that mountain in the morning, whole, the only one, and that there was a price, and that the price was the walking down itself. The price was that he would carry it home. He would carry the story of the eyes down into the town, into the churches and the kitchens and the schoolyards, and the story would do the rest. The story would bring people back. It always brought people back. Grief is a road that only runs uphill, he said. That is what it is. It does not hunt. It is seen, and the ones who see it and live cannot help but carry it, and the carrying calls the next ones up. Every search party that came for Ezra fed it. Every memorial we ever held fed it. Every time I stood on this grass and told his name to keep him from being forgotten, I was ringing a bell it could hear. I have known it for 50 years, Clifford said, and I could never stop, because the only way to starve it was to let Ezra be truly forgotten, and I could not do that to him. And so I brought it Melvin, and I brought it Tracy, and God help me I brought it you, and I only understood the whole shape of it last night, listening to that old man's cane go tapping out into the black. And then Clifford Hayes told me the fourth rule. He said his granddad had never finished it, because his granddad had understood it, and understanding it was worse than any death, and the old man had chosen to spare him. But Clifford said we were past sparing now. He put his mouth to my ear in the copper fog, and he finished the rule his grandfather had carried to the grave, the rule that ends all the others, and it was this. He said, the worst thing you can ever do out there is get away from it, and tell it well. Because the eyes are not for you to see by, he said. You have it backwards. Everyone has it backwards. The red is not so it can look at you. The red is so that you will look at it, and remember it, and carry it, and make others look. The eyes are not for seeing, they are for being seen. And the one thing it cannot do for itself, the only thing, is spread. It needs a mouth. It needs a survivor. It needs a good clear telling, carried down the mountain to warm rooms full of people who will listen with their hearts in their throats and think, I have to see that place. I have to know if it is true. That is the harvest, not the taking, the telling. I understood then why he had thanked me at my door the way a man thanks you for a thing he knows you cannot give. He had known, even then, that I was another mouth. He had seen me count their lamps from my lookout with my careful ranger's attention, and he had known that a man who counts that well would live to tell it well. The yellow light out in the fog grew brighter and warmer and nearer, and it was so like home that Tammy made a small broken sound and started to lean toward it, and Clifford caught her and held her, and she wept into his coat, and he said into her hair, no, child, no. That is exactly what it is for. The wanting is the whole of it. And Jerome Ward, who had spent his whole life not being afraid, and who had watched a thing take an old man out of tied boots and a young woman off the frost and a boy out of history, turned to face that warm and lying light, and he lifted the dead man's cane, and he said, low and even and almost gentle, then it can have me, and not one of you. And he walked toward it. He walked toward it in a perfect straight line, on purpose, with his eyes open, into the white, and I understood he was not being fooled. He knew. He walked toward it knowing, to give it the straight line it wanted, to pull it after him, to buy the rest of us the one thing the rest of us needed, which was for its attention to be somewhere other than on us. Clifford screamed his name once, and the fog took Jerome the way water takes a stone, closing white and total over the last of him, and the warm yellow light went with him, sliding off into the murk after that straight walking figure, dimming, gone. And the fog, all at once, was only fog. Cold and wet and empty and ordinary, thinning already at the edges, with the first gray of a real dawn coming up behind it, and no red anywhere, and no yellow anywhere, and the three of us who were left standing on wet grass in the early light with a dead man's cane lying where Jerome had dropped it, and the whole enormous silence of the mountain settling back down over the place where four people had been and were not. We walked down. We did not run, and we did not walk toward anything, and we did not walk away from anything in a straight line. Clifford went first and set a crooked wandering course down off that bald that made no sense to the feet and every sense to the rule, weaving, doubling, never once pointing himself straight at the station even when we could see it far below through the breaking fog, its little green roof, its thread of stovepipe smoke, home, safety, the end of it. We came down the way you come down from something holy or something cursed, slow and sideways and afraid to look at it directly. And we lived. The three of us lived. Clifford Hayes and Tammy Henderson and me. That was some weeks ago now. Clifford does not answer his phone. Tammy left me one message, only that her uncle had stopped speaking, that he sat in his chair and would not say the boy's name anymore, would not say any name, as if he had finally understood that a name spoken is a bell rung, and had chosen too late the only starvation left to him, which is silence. And I have been sitting at my window with this form and its one clean line, this box that wants a number, and I have written a number and scratched it out 4 times, because I have finally understood what I am, sitting here. I got away from it, and I am telling it well. I have set it all down, careful and clear, the boots with the laces tied, the cane standing upright in the laurel, the counting under the static, the warm yellow light at the exact distance of home. I have made you feel the cold of that fog. I have made you smell the copper. I did it without meaning to, the way water runs downhill, the way a good clear teller cannot help but tell, and now it is done, and you have seen it. You have looked at the red. You are carrying it now. And some of you, I know, are already thinking the thought, the one it is counting on, the only thought that matters to the thing on that bald. You are thinking, I would like to know if that place is real. I have not filled in the box. I am going to leave the number blank, and let the office make of it what they will, because I have learned that the honest count was never 6, or 7, or 8. The honest count is however many of you are listening. That is the number that is unaccounted for. That is the number it is waiting on. The eyes are not for seeing. They are for being seen, and now they have been. 6 of us went up the mountain that summer. I am the only one who came back down, and even now, all these years later, I do not sleep with the window open. Not because of the cold, because on certain nights, when the wind slides down off the high country, I still hear my name in it. Soft, patient, the way you would call a child in from the yard when supper is ready and there is no hurry, because you know that sooner or later the child always comes home. I am going to tell you what happened up there, on the deadening, below Sorrel Gap, in the last full week of that August. I have never told the whole of it. The people who would have believed me are gone, and the people who are left would only look at me the way you are probably looking at your screen right now, half curious and half certain that I have lost the thread of things. That is fine. Believe what you want. Just do one thing for me. If you are ever up in the old mountains after nightfall, and you hear someone you love call your name from out past the last of the firelight, keep your mouth shut. I will explain why. God help me, I will explain all of it. My name is James Carter. That August I was 45 years old, and I believed I understood the world well enough to laugh at the parts of it I could not see. I had a good job in the city and a small apartment, and the kind of life where the scariest thing that ever happened to me was a light left red too long. I want you to remember that, later. I want you to remember that I was a reasonable man before the mountain got hold of me. The trip was my great-uncle Michael's idea. Michael Brown was 70 that year, and he had grown up in those hollows, in a house that no longer stood, on a road that no longer had a name. He left the mountains as a young man, the way most of them did, and he spent 50 years down in the flatland, missing a place he could never quite describe to anyone. When his heart started to give him trouble, he told the family he wanted one more summer up top before he was too old to make the climb. He wanted to sit at the spring where he had been baptized. He wanted to show us the country he came from. I could not tell him no. I do not think anyone could ever tell Michael no. So there were 6 of us in 2 trucks, grinding up a Forest Service road so old and so washed out that the last 2 miles took us the better part of an hour. Michael rode up front with me, one hand flat on the dashboard, calling out turns that had no signs, remembering the land the way you remember a face you loved. In the back seat sat Patricia Wilson, 65, who had been Michael's companion for the better part of 20 years and who was born in the same string of hollows he was. She said almost nothing on the drive up. She kept her eyes on the tree line the whole way, and once, when a stand of pale dead pines went by on the ridge above us, I watched her mouth move in the mirror, and I could have sworn she was saying a prayer. In the second truck came Robert Miller, 60, who had been Michael's friend and once his brother-in-law, and who did not believe in anything he could not sell, buy, or shoot. Robert had spent 30 years in construction, and he treated the mountain the way he treated a job site, like something that would do what he told it if he yelled loud enough. Next to him rode his wife, Linda Johnson, 52, a retired schoolteacher with a soft voice and a spine of iron, the kind of woman who packs a first aid kit for a walk to the mailbox. And in the bed of the second truck, wedged among the coolers with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, was Susan Davis, 38, the youngest of us. Susan was a family friend, a naturalist who made a small living recording bird calls and creek sounds and selling them to people who could not sleep. She had brought a little handheld recorder up with her, a black device the size of a candy bar, and she never went anywhere without it. Keep that recorder in your mind. It matters. At the end, we reached the deadening a little before dusk. That is a real word, up in the mountains. A deadening is a place where the trees have died standing. A whole slope of gray trunks stripped of bark and needle, reaching up out of the green like the bones of something that fell a long time ago and never finished rotting. Michael's people had cleared it a century back and then walked away, and the forest had come partway home again. But the heart of the clearing stayed bare. In the middle of it, ringed with laurel, was the spring. The water came up cold and clean out of a cleft in the rock, and it ran off downhill in a thin silver line that lost itself in the ferns. We made camp at the edge of the deadening, close to the tree line, with the spring a short walk to the north. And that is when I saw the first thing that did not sit right with me, though I did not know yet to be afraid of it. Michael would not let us set the tents until he had walked the perimeter. He took a canvas sack out of his truck, and from it he pulled lengths of old iron chain, rusted almost through, and a handful of horseshoes worn thin, and he began to lay them out in a rough circle around the ground where we would sleep. He hung a horseshoe on a fence post of dead pine that he drove into the earth. He strung the chain low between the trunks. He poured a line of coarse salt along the ground on the mountain side of the camp, the side that faced up toward Sorrel Gap. He did all of this slowly, with his bad hip aching, and he did it the way a man says his rosary, without hurry and without doubt. Robert watched him for about 2 minutes before he could not stand it any longer. "What in the world are you doing, Mike?" he said, and he was already laughing. "You planning to shoe a horse or catch a ghost?" Michael did not look up. "Neither," he said. "I am keeping the old way. My grandmother kept it every night of her life up here, and her mother before her. Iron on the line, and salt to the high ground, and no names after nightfall. You do not have to believe it. You just have to let me do it." "No names after nightfall," Robert said, and he shook his head and grinned at Linda. "You hear that? We cannot say our own names. What is going to get us, the census taker?" Linda did not grin back. She was watching Patricia, and Patricia had gone very still by the fire, and Linda, who taught children for 30 years and knew fear when she saw it on a face, put her hand on Robert's arm and said, quietly, "Let the man work." We got the fire going as the light failed. There is a particular way the gloom comes down in a deep hollow. It does not fall from the sky the way it does in open country. It comes up out of the ground first, pooling in the low places, climbing the trunks, so that the tops of the dead pines still glow pale and pink, while your own feet have already gone to shadow. By the time we had eaten, the deadening around us was a field of gray shapes standing in the murk, and the ring of firelight felt very small, and the mountain above us felt very large. That was when Michael told us about the slank. He did not mean to frighten us. I want to be fair to him. He told it the way an old man tells a story he has carried his whole life, half warning and half wonder, poking the fire while he spoke. There is a thing that walks the high hollows, he said. My grandmother called it the slank. Her word, or her mother's word, I never knew. She said it was here before her people came, and it would be here after they left, and she was right about the leaving. She said it was tall, taller than a man, taller than two men standing one on the other's shoulders when it wanted to be, though it could fold itself down small when it did not. Thin as a fence rail, thin as the gap between two boards, gray as the dead trees, so that in a deadening like this one you could look right at it and take it for one more trunk until it moved. And the way it moved, she said, was the worst of it. Its joints bent the wrong way, and too many times, so that watching it walk was like watching a hand of long fingers try to be a leg. Robert snorted, but he did not say anything, and I noticed that he had stopped grinning. It did not hunt like a bear or a cat, Michael said. It did not chase, it called. That is how it fed. It would sit out past the light, patient as a stone, and it would learn you. It would listen to the way your people called to one another across the night, and it would take those names into itself. And then, late, when the fire was low and you were half asleep and lonesome for something you could not name, it would call to you in a voice you loved, your mother's voice, your husband's, a child you buried. It would call your name in that voice, from out in the trees, and if you answered, if you so much as said a word back to it, it had you. Because now it knew the shape of your voice too, and it could wear you, and it could stand at the edge of the firelight and call the next one out using the sound of the one it had already taken. The fire popped. Somewhere off in the deadening, a long way off, an owl called, and every one of us flinched. So you do not answer, Michael said. That is the whole of the old way. When you strip the iron and the salt off of it, you do not answer. My grandmother told me it plain. The same words every time, and I will tell them to you now, because we are sleeping on its ground tonight, and you ought to know. She said, the mountain does not know your name, only the slank bothers to learn it. So when you hear yourself called up here, you hold your tongue, and it passes you by. You hold your tongue, and it passes you by. I have turned those words over 10,000 times since that night. I believed them, that first night. We all did, a little, in the way you believe a ghost story while the teller is still talking and the woods are lightless. What none of us understood, what Michael himself did not understand, was that his grandmother had told him only half the truth, and the half she left out was the half that mattered. We turned in not long after. Susan set her recorder on a flat rock at the edge of camp, inside the iron, and pointed the little microphone out toward the deadening. She wanted the night sounds, she said. The spring, the wind, the owls. She had no idea what she was leaving running. I lay in my tent a long time listening to the others go quiet. Robert's snoring started up like a chainsaw. The fire settled to coals, and I was almost gone, right at the soft edge of sleep, when I heard it for the first time. A voice, out in the trees, far off, faint, and it was saying a name. Susan, it said. Suzanne. Drawn out, gentle, rising at the end like a question. I came awake with my heart going hard. I told myself it was Michael or Patricia, someone up to use the bushes, calling to Susan about something. But then I heard the same voice, from a little farther off, say it again. Susan. And this time I knew, the way you know a wrong note in a song you have heard your whole life, that no living throat had made that sound. It was too even, it held too long, it came from the wrong direction, from up the mountain, from the high side, from the salt side. And then a fourth voice, close, from the next tent over, whispered, Did you hear that? It was Linda. She was awake too. She had heard it too. Nobody answered the thing in the trees. I want you to know that. That first night, not one of us answered. We lay in our separate tents in the ring of iron with our eyes open and our breath held. 6 people pretending to be asleep, while something out in the deadening said Susan's name over and over into the murk. Patient as water wearing down a stone, learning the exact weight of it, until the sky finally grayed toward morning and the calling stopped. We did not know it yet, but the slank was not disappointed that we had held our tongues. It had all the time in the world, and it had already gotten what it came for that first night. It had gotten Susan's name off of us, off the way we had said it around the fire. Now it only needed one thing more. It needed her voice. And it knew exactly how to make her give it. Morning changes everything, up on a mountain. The gloom drains out of the hollows the way it came, from the low ground up, and the dead pines catch the first light and turn from gray bone to something almost gold, and the spring runs bright, and the terror of the night before folds up small and hides itself, and you feel like a fool for having believed any of it. That is a trap, I know that now. The mountain lets the morning talk you out of your fear so that the night can find you soft again. But that morning I did not know it, and I was glad to be a fool, and so was everybody else. We sat around the cold fire pit with coffee, and we talked ourselves out of the whole thing. Robert led the charge, of course. It was an animal, he said. A fox, or one of those screech owls that sound like a woman. He had heard them plenty. His certainty was a comfort, and we let it comfort us. Even Michael, who had gone quiet and old-looking in the early light, and who did not argue but did not agree either. Only Patricia would not be talked out of it. She sat a little apart with her coffee going cold in her hands, and she said, to no one in particular, "It knows she is here now." And when Linda asked her, gently, "Who knows who is here?" Patricia only shook her head and would not say the word out loud in the daylight, as if saying it might call it closer. Susan was the only one of us who was excited. She had gone straight to her recorder at first light and played back the night, and she came almost running across the camp with the little device held out and her face lit up like a girl at Christmas. "You have to hear this," she kept saying. "James, you have to hear this." I did not want to hear it, but she pressed the small speaker to my ear and pushed play. And under the wash of the spring and the wind I heard it again, thin and far and awful in the daylight, the way it had been in the night. "Susan, Suzanne." And Susan, God rest her, laughed and said, "Is that not the strangest bird you ever heard?" And she was already talking about which sound library she would sell it to, and I looked over her shoulder at Michael, and Michael had gone the color of the dead pines. "Erase that," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Susan, honey, erase that right now." She thought he was joking. She never got the chance to take him seriously. We spent the day on the mountain, and for most of it, it was the trip Michael had dreamed of. He took us up to the old home place, or where it had been, a rectangle of foundation stones swallowed in briar, a chimney standing alone in a clearing full of orange daylilies gone wild from some garden 100 years dead. He showed us the spring where a preacher had dunked him under as a boy. He told us stories about people whose names meant nothing to us but everything to him, and Patricia held his hand, and for a few hours the mountain was just a mountain, beautiful and old and kind. It was Susan who found the first track. We were coming back down toward camp in the long light of late afternoon, strung out along the trail, when she stopped at the edge of a muddy seep where a little water crossed the path, and she went very still, and she said, "James, come look at this." I came and looked. Pressed into the black mud was a footprint. It was long, far longer than any man's foot, narrow as a plank, and it had too many toes, or perhaps they were fingers, long and thin and splayed, ending in points that had dug into the mud. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was the stride. There was one print, and then, where the next should have been, 3 body lengths on, there was another, and it faced the wrong way, as if the thing had stepped forward and then turned its foot completely around without turning its body, and stepped forward again. I stood there in the warm evening with the birds singing, and I felt the cold come up through the soles of my boots and into my chest, and I understood, for the first time all the way down, that Michael's grandmother had not been telling a story. Robert came and looked and said it was a bear track deformed by the mud, and his voice was not as loud as it had been that morning. Linda did not look at it long. She took Susan's arm and started her walking back toward camp, and she kept looking up at the dead pines on the slope above us, at the way they stood there gray and still, and I knew she was doing what I was doing, which was trying to count them, and losing the count, because some of them, she could not have told you which, did not seem to be in quite the same place they had been a moment before. I need to stop here and say something to you directly. The way Susan would talk right into that little recorder of hers. If you have made it this far into what I am telling you, then you already understand this is not a story about a bear, and I know how these things go. I know that right now, in the safety of wherever you are, some part of you is enjoying this the way you enjoy a cold night and a warm blanket, at a comfortable distance. I do not blame you for that. I would probably be doing the same. But I am asking you, before this goes where it is going, to do the one thing I promised I would explain, and to remember it if you ever need it. When the voice calls, you do not answer, not to argue with it, not to tell it to leave you alone, not even to scream. Silence is the only wall that ever held it. Keep that with you. Now let me tell you how we lost the first of us, because it was Robert, and it was Robert precisely because he could not keep his mouth shut. We ate early and we built the fire high, higher than we needed, and nobody suggested going to sleep. Michael rehung the iron that had shifted and freshened the salt line, and this time Robert helped him, and no one laughed. We sat close together in the light, and we waited for the gloom to come up out of the ground, and it came. And the dead pines went to shapes in the murk, and the deadening filled up with shadow, and we waited. The calling started later than it had the night before. Patient, it knew we were waiting for it, and it made us wait longer. It was near midnight when the first voice came, and it was not Susan's name this time. It was a man's name. It was Robert. Rob. From out in the trees. Rob. Come here. And I felt Robert go rigid beside me, because it was not just his name, it was his brother's voice saying it. His brother, who I would later learn had died in a mill accident when they were both young men, whose voice Robert had not heard in 40 years and would have known in his sleep. Rob, the voice said, in his dead brother's tones, come here, I need you. And Robert's face in the firelight came apart like wet paper, 40 years of grief cracking open all at once. Do not, Michael said. He had Robert by the wrist. Robert, it is not him. You know it is not him. Do not answer it. And Robert did not answer, not with words, but he was crying now, silent, shaking, and the voice kept calling, so tender, so real. Rob, it is me. Why will you not come? And I watched a strong, hard skeptic of a man be unmade by the one sound in all the world he had no defense against. And then, God help him, he did the thing you must never do. He did not say a name. He was too smart for that, even then. But he opened his mouth, and out of him came a sound that was not a word, a broken raw sob, half his brother's name and half just pain, torn out of him before he could stop it. It was enough. It only ever needs a sound. It needs to taste your voice one time. The calling stopped. The whole deadening went silent, the kind of silent that has a weight to it, that presses on your ears. And then, from out in the trees, in the exact voice of Robert Miller, right down to the catch in his throat, the thing said, Linda. Linda, honey. Come here, Linda screamed. Robert grabbed for her, and she was already up and running, not toward the voice, away from it, blind with terror, and she hit the iron chain at the edge of the camp and went over it into the shadow. And that was the mistake. That was the second rule broken in one night, because you do not cross the iron. The iron is the wall, and she crossed it. Robert went after her without a thought, over the chain, into the gloom, both of them gone past the salt line and into the deadening, and Michael was up and shouting, no, stay in the iron, but they were already gone, two shapes swallowed into the gray trunks, Robert calling Linda's name out loud, over and over, Linda, Linda, feeding it, giving it more with every cry, and Linda's voice answering him, Robert, where are you? I cannot see, feeding it, feeding it. We heard them for a while. Then we heard only one of them. Then we heard, from two directions at once, both their voices calling back toward the camp, calling our names now, James, Susan, Michael, Patricia, come help us, please. We are hurt, please come. And they were perfect. They were exactly right. And the four of us who were left stood inside the ring of iron with the fire roaring, and we did not move, and we did not speak, and we did not answer, and we listened to the voices of our friends beg us to come die with them. Until, one by one, they stopped. Patricia was on her knees in the dirt. Michael stood over her with his old face gone to stone, staring out into the deadening where two of us had just walked into the trees and become bait. And Susan had her recorder in her hands. It had been running the whole time. She was staring at it like she had never seen it before, and in a small voice, a child's voice, she said, it got their voices. It has their voices now. And James, it had mine first. I do not remember all of that last night in order. Terror does something to time. It cuts it into pieces and shuffles them. And some of the pieces I have never gotten back, and some of them I would give anything to lose. But I remember enough. I remember more than enough. Let me give it to you the way it comes, and you will have the whole of it, and then I will be finished, and I will never speak of it again. We did not sleep. Of course we did not sleep. We built the fire until it was a bonfire, until the heat pushed us back, and we stood in a tight knot in the center of the iron, the four of us, Michael and Patricia and Susan and me, and we watched the tree line. And a little after the deepest part of the night, it came to the edge of the light, and we saw it. I had told myself all that day that when I finally saw it, it would be less than I feared. That the mind makes monsters bigger in the gloom. That is another lie the mountain lets you believe. It was worse. It came out from among the dead pines, and for a moment I could not tell it from them, gray and tall and still, and then it took a step, and I understood why Michael's grandmother had run out of words. It was the height of the trees. It had folded itself thin to pass between the trunks, and now it let itself unfold, joint after joint after joint, more joints than a body should have, each one bending the wrong way, so that it rose up out of the shadow like something being poured upward. Its limbs were long past reason. Its head, if you could call it that, was small and low and turned slightly to one side, the way a bird turns its head to look at you with one eye. It had no face that I could bear to look at. It had a mouth. The mouth was the only part of it that seemed to belong to a living thing, and it was full, too full, of small even teeth, and it was smiling, because it had learned that a mouth that smiles is a mouth you trust. It stopped at the salt line. It could not cross the salt, or would not. It stood there at the edge of the firelight, swaying very slightly, all those wrong joints settling, and it looked at us with its head cocked, and then it opened that terrible smiling mouth, and out of it came Linda's voice. "Please," it said, in Linda's soft schoolteacher voice, the voice that had read to children for 30 years. "I am so cold. Will you not let me in?" Patricia made a sound I hope to never hear again from a human being. Michael put his body in front of her, and the thing at the tree line went through them all, one after another, every voice it had collected. It begged in Robert's voice. It wept in the voice of Robert's dead brother. It called for help in the voices of Linda and of people I did not know, old voices, mountain voices, names out of Michael's childhood, because it had been up here a long time, and it had a great many voices, and it had learned every one of them from someone who was now gone. And then it used Susan's. It looked right at her, and it said, in her own voice, perfect, the voice she used to talk into her recorder, it said, "James, come look at this." Susan broke. I do not blame her. To hear your own voice come out of that mouth, to know it wears you now, to understand that when you are dead it will stand at the edge of some other camp and call some other person to their death using the exact sound of you. She broke, and she ran. Not away this time, but toward it, screaming at it, "Give it back, give it back," and she crossed the salt line before I could catch her. I caught her arm. I swear I caught her arm. But she was already over the salt, and the thing was faster than anything that size has any right to be. And it came down on her out of the black in a rush of folding joints, and it took her so fast and so completely that there was almost nothing to it. One moment my hand was on her wrist, and the next my hand was closed on empty air, and she was simply gone, up into the pines, and the deadening was silent. 3 of us left. Then, a moment later, 2. Michael Brown was 70 years old, and his heart was bad, and his hip was bad, and he could not have run 10 steps. But he was not trying to run. While I stood frozen with my empty hand still out in front of me, Michael took Patricia's face in both of his hands, and he kissed her forehead, and he said something to her too quiet for me to hear, and then he pushed her toward me, hard, and he said, "Get her down the mountain, James." And then he did the bravest and most terrible thing I have ever seen a man do. He walked to the salt line, and he stepped over it. He stepped over it on purpose. And he began to talk, not to us, to it. He walked out toward the tree line with his arms a little away from his sides, an old man offering himself, and he called out into the gloom, "Here I am," he said. "You have wanted this hollow back a long time. Here is the last one who remembers your name. Come and take him." And he said the word. The word Patricia would not say in daylight. He said it out loud, into the dark, slank, "Come and take me." And he gave it his voice freely. Every warning his grandmother ever taught him, thrown away in that one moment, because he had finally understood the thing she never told him, and he was buying us the only thing he had left to buy us with, which was time. I did not watch it take him. Patricia was screaming, and I had her around the waist, and I was already dragging her back through the camp, past the fire, and I grabbed one thing as we went, one single thing, and to this day I do not know why. I grabbed Susan's recorder off the rock where it sat. It was still running. And then we were out of the iron on the downhill side, on the trail, running and falling and running through the Backwoods toward the trucks 2 miles below, and behind us, up in the deadening, I heard my great-uncle's voice call out once, strong and clear and unafraid, and then I heard it call out a second time, in a way that was not strong. And then I did not hear him anymore, and I heard, instead, the thing begin to call down the mountain after us in his voice. "James, Patricia, come back. And I held Patricia's hand so hard I felt the bones move, and I put my mouth against her ear as we ran, and I said the only prayer I had left. Do not answer. Whatever you hear, do not answer. She did not answer. All the way down that mountain, with Michael's voice and Susan's voice and Linda's voice calling to us out of the night on every side, pleading, weeping, telling us they were alive, telling us we had left them, telling us to come back and help. Patricia Wilson did not say one single word. She was 65 years old, and she had just watched the man she loved for 20 years walk into the shadow to save her. And she ran down that mountain in the black night in total silence, because she was a mountain woman, and she knew the old way, and she knew it in her bones. You hold your tongue, and it passes you by. We reached the trucks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in. And as the engine turned over and the headlights came up and threw 2 long cones of light back up the road we had come down, I saw it, one last time, at the very edge of the light, tall as the trees, folded and gray and patient, watching us go, not chasing, just watching, smiling its full smile. And I understood, in that moment, why it did not chase. It did not need to. We got Patricia down. We got out. I told the authorities that our party had been caught in a flash flood at the spring, that the others had been swept away, that I had barely gotten one survivor out. They searched the deadening for 2 weeks. They found nothing. Not a boot, not a bone, not a scrap of tent. 6 went up, they wrote, and the mountain was steep, and the water was high, and these things happen, and they closed the file. Patricia never spoke of it to me again. She died 4 years later, in her sleep, in her own bed, far from any mountain, and I like to believe she got away clean. I like to believe that. I did not get away clean. I want to tell you the last thing, and then I am done, and you can go on with your night, and I hope you sleep, and I hope you never learn whether I am telling the truth. Michael's grandmother told him half of it. She told him, you hold your tongue, and it passes you by. And she believed that. Everyone up in those hollows believed it, and they built their whole old way around it, iron and salt and silence, and they went to their graves thinking that silence saved them. But it does not save you. That is the half she never knew, or never dared to say. Silence does not make the slank forget you. Nothing makes it forget you. Once it has your name, once it has learned the sound of you, you are its, and holding your tongue does not break that. It only means you get to walk down the mountain. It only means it lets you go home first, because it is patient. It has all the time in the world. And it does not chase, because it does not have to. It already has your voice. It got mine that first night, off the way Susan said my name around the fire, off the way Michael called it out running down the mountain. It has been wearing me, a little, ever since. I know this because of the recorder. I took it down the mountain, and it was running the whole time, and months later, when I was strong enough, I listened to it, all of it, the whole last night, and on the recording, under the screaming and the running and the voices of the dead, there is a sound. It starts faint, that first night, and it grows. It is a voice, learning, practicing, saying my name over and over in the night, trying it out, getting it right. James, James, softer each time, more like me each time. Until at the very end of the recording, after the trucks have gone and the mountain is quiet, there is one last James, and it is perfect, and it is mine, and it is patient, and it is not coming from up the mountain anymore. It is coming from much closer than that. So here is the last thing, the only thing. If you are ever up in the old mountains after nightfall, and you hear someone you love call your name from out past the last of the firelight, do not answer. You already know that. But know the rest of it too. Not answering will not save you. It will only let you go home. And then, some night, years later, when you have almost let yourself forget, when you finally leave the window open again because the night is warm and the world is safe, and you are a reasonable person who does not believe in such things, you will hear it. Out past the yard, soft, patient, calling you in the way you call a child in from the dark when supper is ready and there is no hurry, because it knows. Sooner or later, the child always comes home. Do not answer. Do not ever answer. And whatever you do, tonight, before you sleep, close the window. I found the first note 3 days after they went missing. It was waterlogged and barely legible, stuck between 2 rocks along Ravine Creek, the paper torn and the ink running like tears down the page. All it said was, "The sky is watching. My name is James Mitchell. I have worked as a ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for 19 years. In all that time, I have never encountered anything that prepared me for what happened on Storm Ridge that July. What I am about to tell you is the truth. I know how it sounds. I know that people will read this and dismiss it as some exaggeration or a trick of the wilderness, but I was there. I saw the aftermath. I found what was left behind, and I still wake up at night listening to the sound of thunder, wondering if it is just a storm or if it is something far worse. The hiking group arrived on July 14th. There were 6 of them, and they had reserved the Ravine Creek campsite for a week-long journey through the backcountry. I checked them in personally at the ranger station that morning. I remember David Garcia first. He was a handsome man, 40 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He had the look of someone used to being in charge. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from success in some professional field. His wife, Jennifer Taylor, was 36 and seemed nervous about the entire trip. She kept asking me questions about the difficulty of the trails, about weather patterns, about bears and dangerous animals. I told her what I always tell hikers: stay on the marked paths, do not wander off trail. Respect the mountains. She nodded, but I could see that her jaw was tight with worry. The others introduced themselves. Barbara Martinez was 58 years old and looked like she had done this many times before. There was a calmness to her, a practiced ease with gear and maps. William Anderson was 72. He was an older man, but strong, with the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. His grandson, Richard Thomas, was 55. He had brought his daughter, Karen Moore, who was 63. They seemed like a close-knit family, the kind that still did things together, that still valued the shared experience of being in nature. I gave them the standard briefing. There was a cold front moving in from the west. The forecast predicted heavy rain and possible thunderstorms for the next 3 days, clearing up by Wednesday. The trails could get muddy, creek crossings might be difficult. They all seemed to understand the risks. David Garcia asked specifically about the storm potential. I told him what the Weather Service told me. It was July. Afternoon thunderstorms were common in the mountains. They would pass. As long as they found shelter when the weather turned, they would be fine. That was my mistake. I should have told them about Storm Ridge. I should have warned them about the old stories. But those are just stories, passed down through generations, the kind of folklore that every region has. Hikers do not need to hear ghost tales. They need practical information about trail conditions and water sources. Barbara asked where the most scenic overlook was on their route. I told her about Ravine Vista, a clearing about 8 miles from their starting point that offered an unobstructed view of 3 valleys. She marked it on her map. They all seemed eager to see it. I remember thinking that they looked like good people, responsible, careful, the kind of hikers who would not take unnecessary risks. I remember Jennifer asking one more question as they were leaving. She asked if anything bad had ever happened on these trails, if anyone had ever gotten lost or injured. I told her the truth. Over the years, yes, there had been incidents. A few hikers had strayed from marked paths and had to be rescued. One man years ago had died of a heart attack, but nothing extraordinary. This was a well-traveled route. Thousands of people hiked these mountains every year without incident. She seemed to accept that answer. She shouldered her pack and followed the others up the trail toward Ravine Creek. I did not see them again until 5 days later, when the Park Service found David Garcia's pack near the base of Stone Hollow Canyon. It was empty except for a journal and 4 photographs. But I am getting ahead of myself. The weather reports came in at 6 o'clock that evening. The cold front was moving faster than predicted. Thunderstorms were expected by midnight, heavy rain, possible flash flooding in low-lying areas. I notified all the backcountry hikers through the emergency alert system. I knew that several groups were out on the trails. The weather was not ideal, but it was manageable. People camp in storms all the time. As long as they stayed in designated campsites and did not attempt to hike in the heavy precipitation, they would be safe. The power went out at 11:47 that night. Lightning struck the ranger station and knocked out the electrical lines. I was alone in the office, and for a moment the whole world went black. Then the emergency generator kicked in. I sat there in the humming light of fluorescent bulbs and listened to the storm rage outside. The wind was incredible. I could hear it screaming through the valley, battering the windows of the station. Rain hammered against the glass in sheets. Thunder rolled constantly, one boom following another so quickly that the individual sounds blended into a single continuous roar. This is not unusual for Appalachia. The mountains create their own weather. Storms that might be ordinary in other places become intense and chaotic in these valleys. The terrain channels the wind. The elevation creates pressure systems. The moisture from the rivers and creeks is drawn up into towering clouds. I have seen storms here that looked like the sky itself was breaking apart. But something about this storm felt different. I could not explain it then, and I cannot explain it now. There was a quality to it that seemed almost intentional. The way the lightning kept striking the ridge, the way the thunder did not sound random but seemed to follow a pattern. I sat in that ranger station and I felt something watching. It is difficult to describe that sensation to someone who has not felt it. It is not fear exactly, though fear was part of it. It is more like the intuitive awareness that you are not alone, that something is paying attention to you. I tried to contact the groups on the radio, but the storm had knocked out the repeater on the mountain. I could not raise anyone. I told myself that this was fine. They were in established campsites. They had shelter. They had emergency supplies. The storm would pass, and everything would be normal in the morning. The storm raged until dawn. I stayed awake the entire night. I told myself I was monitoring weather updates, but the truth is that I was listening to the thunder. I was counting the seconds between the lightning flashes. I was listening to the wind and trying to understand what my instincts were telling me. At 4 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood go cold. It was faint at first, barely audible beneath the wind and rain, but it was there. A sound like voices, but not human voices. It was as if the wind itself was making sounds that resembled language. Sounds that seemed almost like words, but twisted and wrong. I stood up from my chair and went to the window. Outside, the rain was so heavy that I could barely see 20 feet. The lightning illuminated the trees in that blue-white moment of brightness, and the shadows between the trees seemed impossibly deep. Impossibly dark, and in one of those moments of lightning, I saw something that I have never been able to reconcile with rational thought. In the trees at the edge of the clearing, there was a shape. It was tall, impossibly tall. It did not move like a person moves. It seemed to bend and twist in ways that human joints do not allow. For just an instant, I thought I saw the outline of something that might have been wings. Then the lightning faded, and the shape was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. An artifact of exhaustion and storm watching, my eyes playing tricks on me. I was stressed and worried about the hikers. My mind was manufacturing threats that did not exist. But deep down, in the part of my brain that remembers the stories my grandfather told me, the part that carries the old warnings that the Appalachian people have been passing down for generations, I knew what I had seen. When dawn finally came, the storm had moved to the east. The rain had stopped. The wind had died down to occasional gusts. The sky was gray and low, but it was lightning. I made coffee and tried to compose myself. By 7 in the morning, I was on the radio calling out to the hiking groups, asking for status reports. 3 groups checked in. They reported heavy rain, some flooding in the creeks, minor damage to camping gear, but they were all accounted for. They were all safe. All except one. The group at Ravine Creek did not respond. I tried again, then again. Standard procedure is to wait 24 hours before initiating a rescue operation. Hikers sometimes wander out of radio range. They sometimes turn off their radios to save batteries. But the guidebook they were carrying had an emergency beacon, the kind that sends a satellite signal if they needed help. That signal had not been activated. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I had convinced my supervisor to let me hike up to Ravine Creek and do a welfare check. I packed my pack with emergency supplies, my radio, my satellite phone, and I headed up the trail. The trail to Ravine Creek takes about 3 hours. I made it in 2.5 because I was moving fast. Too fast, probably. I was not thinking clearly. I was focused on finding the group and confirming that they were fine. I was not thinking about the strange shape I had seen in the lightning. I was not thinking about the voices in the wind or the feeling of being watched. The trail follows the creek for the last mile. It is a beautiful route, with the water rushing over rocks, the trees creating a canopy of green above, the sound of falling water in the distance. But everything looked different that morning. The trees seemed taller and more oppressive. The shadows under the canopy seemed deeper. The sound of the water seemed almost menacing, like something was speaking through it. I found the camp at 9:30. The first thing I noticed was the complete silence. There was no sound of people, no movement. The tents were still standing, but something about them was wrong. The fabric seemed to have been torn from the inside. Long rips ran down the sides of the nylon. The sleeping bags were still inside, but they were empty. There were no bodies, but there were long marks on the inside walls, marks that looked like they had been made by something with claws or nails, something that had been trying to get out, or something that had been trying to get in. I called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice sounded small and fragile in that quiet place. No one answered. I moved through the camp looking for any sign of the hikers. Their packs were still there, their food and water supplies, their maps and compasses. It was as if they had all simply vanished in the night, but they had not vanished without leaving a trace. I found David Garcia's pack near the edge of the campsite, 100 yards away from the tents, down a small slope toward the creek. Inside was a waterlogged journal and 4 photographs. The journal was partially illegible, but I could make out some of the writing. The first entry was dated July 14th, the day they arrived. It was a cheerful account of the hike, noting the beauty of the trails and the condition of the campsites. The last entry was dated July 15th. It had been written after midnight. "The storm is wrong. The thunder does not sound like normal thunder. It sounds like it is trying to communicate. Barbara thinks I am crazy, but I can hear patterns in it, rhythms, and the lightning keeps striking the same ridge, over and over, like something is using it as a signal. Jennifer is terrified. She wants to break camp and hike out in the rain, but it is not safe to move in this weather." William says he has heard stories, old stories from his grandmother, about things that live in the mountains, spirits that ride the storms. He calls them thunderers. I told him that was folklore, but he said that folklore comes from somewhere, that people do not invent stories like that without reason, that his grandmother warned him to never be outside during the storms in the high places, never in the mountains when the thunder rolls. The lightning just struck so close that I felt the heat on my face, and in that moment of brightness, I saw something, a shape in the sky above the ridge. It was moving, flying, or falling. I cannot describe it properly. It did not have the shape of anything I have ever seen. "We are going to try to leave in the morning. We are going to hike out regardless of the weather. This place feels wrong. It feels like we are not alone. It feels like something is waiting." The journal ended there. The handwriting was shaky and erratic by the last lines. I stood there in the cold mountain air and felt my hand shaking as I held that journal. The photographs were worse. The first image showed the group at the starting point, all 6 of them, smiling at the camera, standing in front of the trail marker. They looked happy. They looked alive. The second photograph showed them at what must have been ravine vista. They were standing at the overlook point, 3 valleys spreading out behind them. But even in that photograph, there was something wrong. The sky above them was not normal. It was swirling. The clouds looked like they were moving in patterns that did not match the wind direction. It looked like the sky itself was watching them. The third photograph was taken at night, in the campsite. It was taken by flash, and the image was grainy and unclear. But I could see the group in the center of the frame, and I could see the trees surrounding them. And in the shadows at the edge of the photograph, there was a shape. Multiple shapes, actually. Tall and distorted, bending in ways that made my stomach turn. The shapes looked like they were moving toward the group, but the photograph had frozen that moment, capturing them in that posture of approach. The fourth photograph was the worst. It was taken from outside the camp. You could see the tents in the foreground, and you could see the sky above the ridge in the background. The sky was illuminated by lightning, and in that lightning you could see clearly, for just that moment, the shape that had been passing over the mountains. It was not a bird. It was not anything that should exist in this world. It had a shape that was almost humanoid but stretched and twisted. It had what might have been wings, but they were wrong, bent at angles that made no anatomical sense, and where the head should have been, there was only a suggestion of form, as if the thing existed partially outside of our normal perception. I could not see an eye or a face, but I knew without a doubt that the thing was aware, that it was looking down at the mountains, that it was looking for something, or looking for someone. I stood in that campsite for what must have been an hour. I was not thinking clearly. My mind was cycling through explanations. It was an animal. It was a trick of the light and overexposure on the camera. It was some kind of reflection or camera malfunction. It was not real. It could not be real. But the tents were torn from the inside, and the hikers were gone. By late afternoon, the search and rescue team had arrived. They had helicopters and dogs and trained personnel. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle beyond the damaged tents, No indication of which direction the hikers had gone or what might have happened to them. The official report concluded that the group had likely left the campsite in the middle of the night, possibly disoriented by the severity of the storm. They had probably gotten lost in the darkness. They had probably attempted to hike out without proper equipment or navigation. They had probably fallen or gotten injured somewhere in the forest. Eventually, the search expanded to cover a 5-mile radius around the campsite. They found nothing, but I found something. On the 8th day of the search, I was hiking back to the ranger station at dusk when I noticed something unusual near Stone Hollow Canyon, about a mile from the campsite. There was a place where the ground seemed disturbed, long lines carved into the earth as if something large had been dragged across the ground. The marks led away from the known trails, down into a ravine that was not on any official hiking map. I followed those marks until it became dark, and I turned back. I did not want to be in that ravine when night fell, but I could see where they led. They descended into a deep gorge, and the disturbed earth covered a distance of at least half a mile. I did not report this to my supervisor. I told myself it was probably bear markings, or erosion, or some other natural phenomenon. But I knew better. In my heart, I knew what those marks meant. Something large had passed through that landscape. Something large enough to leave a trail. Something that had taken the hikers with it. That was the end of the investigation. The hikers were declared missing and presumed dead. Their families were notified. Memorials were held. The case was closed. The Park Service issued new weather advisory procedures, and nothing was ever said publicly about what had happened. But the stories started. Local people in the small towns around the Appalachian Mountains started talking. They talked about old warnings, about the thunderers. They called them sky spirits, ancient things that lived in the storms, beings that were older than the mountains themselves. According to the legends, the thunderers had always been there. They had always hunted in the high places during storms. The native peoples who lived in these mountains for thousands of years had understood this. They had respected it. They had developed a culture and a set of practices designed to keep them safe from the thunderers. But modern people do not respect those old rules anymore. Modern people go hiking during storms. Modern people camp in the high places without thinking about the old warnings. Modern people have forgotten the stories. My grandfather told me once that the stories persist because they are real. He said that indigenous peoples did not invent elaborate folklore about dangerous creatures without reason. He said that the thunderers were something that the earliest people in Appalachia had encountered, had feared, had learned to coexist with through caution and respect. The stories were warnings. They were a survival mechanism. They were knowledge passed down through generations about something that the modern world has decided does not exist. But it does exist. I have read every account I can find about the thunderers. They appear in several indigenous traditions and in the folklore of early European settlers. They are described as creatures of the storms, beings that ride the lightning, things that exist partially outside of normal reality. They are associated with weather phenomena. They are said to be attracted to high places during severe storms. And in nearly every account, there is a warning about human behavior that attracts their attention. The hikers attracted their attention. They were in the high places. They were in the mountains during a severe storm. They were photographing the sky. They were trying to capture the experience. They were making noise and activity that drew notice, and something noticed them. The disappearance did not end with the 6 hikers. That is what I need to make clear to anyone reading this. It did not end because the thunderers did not stop hunting. In the weeks after the group vanished, I received reports from other hikers and campers in the Appalachian Mountains. Strange reports, unverifiable stories. But they all followed a pattern. People reported seeing unusual cloud formations. They reported hearing sounds in storms that did not seem natural. They reported seeing shapes moving in the sky during lightning storms. Most of these reports came from people in the high elevations, hikers who had ignored the new weather advisories and had ventured into the mountains during the subsequent storms. None of the people who reported seeing these things were injured, as far as I knew. But they all reported leaving the mountains immediately after their encounters. They all said that something told them to leave. Not a voice, but a strong feeling, a compulsion, an instinct that their survival depended on getting to lower elevations immediately. One hiker, a woman named Sarah Hendricks who had been camping alone in the northeastern section of the park, reported that she had seen one of the shapes clearly. She said it had been visible for several seconds in a bolt of lightning. She said it looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. She said the head was too large, the arms were too long. The body did not move the way a person moves. And most disturbing, she said it had been looking at her. Not just in her direction, but looking at her specifically. Seeing her. Sarah cut her trip short by 4 days and left the mountains. She reported her experience to me, and I filed an official report. But I did not include her description of the creature. I left that part out. I wrote it up as a large bird, possibly a rare species of vulture or eagle, seen during a storm. I did not want to feed the rumors. I did not want people thinking that there was something dangerous in the mountains. I had a responsibility to protect the park, and that meant not spreading panic, but it also meant ignoring what I knew to be true. In early August, 3 weeks after the first group disappeared, a new group of hikers went missing. They were 6 people, just like the first group, though this was coincidence, I believe. They had been attempting the ridgeline trail that runs along the spine of the mountains for a distance of 15 miles. They had expected to complete the hike in 2 days. They were due to return on a Thursday. They never made it back. This time, I was part of the search team from the beginning. We found their base camp at the northern trailhead. We found their vehicles in the parking area, secured with the keys left in the magnetic box under the rear bumper. Standard procedure for hikers who do not want to carry keys on the trail. We found their emergency communication log, which showed that they had successfully checked in via satellite at their planned waypoints through the first day. But on the morning of the second day, they had not activated their beacon to signal their location. The search began immediately, but this time we did not find 4 photographs and a journal. This time we did not find the abandoned campsite with the torn tents. This time we found something worse. We found signs of their passage along the ridge. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, marked trail, but the footprints did not follow the trail. They diverted. They went upslope, away from the marked path, toward the highest point on the ridge. And when we followed those footprints, we found something that made every searcher on that team stop and stare. At the summit of Storm Peak, the highest point on that section of ridge, the ground was disturbed. There were footprints, 6 sets, we thought, though it was hard to be certain. And there were other marks, claw marks, long gouges in the earth and rock that radiated out from a central point. The marks were enormous. Whatever had made them had claws or talons that were at least 10 inches long, and they had struck with enough force to gouge stone. In the center of the disturbed area, we found 3 items. A hiking boot, a piece of jacket fabric, soaked in what we later determined was blood, and a satellite communication device that had been physically torn apart. The official report classified the incident as a bear attack, likely a grizzly that had wandered south from Montana or a rogue black bear that had grown aggressive. We issued new advisories. We told people not to hike alone. We recommended that hikers make noise to alert any bears in the area. We recommended that all backpackers carry bear spray, but it had not been a bear. No bear moves the way the thunderers move. No bear makes marks on stone the way those marks were made, and no bear pulls a satellite communication device apart with its bare hands or claws or whatever appendages it uses. By late August, there had been 5 more reported missing persons incidents in the mountains. Not all of them were in my jurisdiction. Some were in other ranger districts. Some were just on the edge of the park, in the national forest land adjacent to the park. But the pattern was the same. Hikers in high elevations. Severe storms, missing people, no bodies found. The news media eventually picked up the story. By September, there were reporters from CNN and the Weather Channel doing segments on the Appalachian missing persons mystery. The stories were sensationalized and superficial, focusing on the human drama of missing hikers and grieving families, not on the actual pattern of what was happening. But I saw the pattern. I saw it clearly. The thunderers were not random in their hunting. They had preferences. They targeted high elevations. They targeted storms. They targeted people who were trying to document or capture the storms, who were taking photographs or videos, who were trying to use technology to engage with the mountains. They targeted people who were not treating the mountains with respect, people who saw the wilderness as entertainment, people who thought that the mountains existed for their amusement. And then in the middle of September, something changed. I was off duty that day. I was at my house in the small town of Ridgeton, about 20 miles from the park. I was drinking coffee and reading a book when I received a call on my personal cell phone. It was William Anderson, the surviving member of the original hiking group. Or at least, someone claiming to be William Anderson. His voice sounded different, older, weaker, but the caller knew details that only William would know. He knew what had happened on that final night. He knew about the sounds in the wind. He knew about the shape that had appeared in the lightning. He knew about David Garcia's journal. William said he had something to tell me. He said he had been hiding for weeks, living rough in the forest, afraid to contact anyone, but he said he could not live with the secret anymore. He said he had to tell someone what had happened. He asked if I would meet him. I told him to call the Park Service directly, to contact the ranger station, to come down from the mountains and seek medical attention. He said he could not do that. He said he was not allowed to do that. He said that something had marked him that night, and it had not finished with him yet. He said he could feel it watching him. He said it was drawn to him. He said that if he came down from the mountains, if he went to inhabited areas, the thing would follow him. He said that he had to stay in the high places, had to stay moving, had to keep himself away from people, to keep them safe. I told him where to meet me. A place called Hollow Creek, a remote spot in the national forest where I sometimes went to think. It was about 10 miles from Ridgeton, a 40-minute drive. William said he would be there at sunset. I should not have gone. I know that now. I should have called my supervisor. I should have involved official channels. I should have understood that something was very wrong with the situation. But I wanted to know what had happened. I wanted to hear the truth from someone who had actually been there. And if I am being honest with myself, I wanted to understand what the Thunderers were. I wanted to know if William had seen them clearly. I wanted to know if they were truly the creatures of legend or something else entirely. I arrived at Hollow Creek at 5:45 in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip toward the western mountains. The air was already turning cooler. There was a weather system moving in from the southwest, and the wind was picking up. The sky had that quality that storm systems bring, that brooding quality, as if the atmosphere itself was alive and aware. William was sitting on a rock near the creek when I arrived. Or the thing that had been William Anderson was sitting on that rock. I recognized him by his clothing and his general build, but his appearance had changed drastically. He had lost weight. His face was gaunt. His eyes had an intensity to them that was not human. His skin had a grayish tint, and there were marks on his face and arms. They looked like burns, like something very hot had touched his skin. They formed patterns, lines, almost like writing or symbols, but I could not read them. He looked up at me when I approached, and I saw something in those eyes that made me want to run. There was intelligence there, understanding, but also something else, something distant, something that was not quite present in the moment. He spoke, and his voice was not quite what I remembered. It was hollow, like it was coming from a great distance away. He said hello to me. He said my name. He thanked me for meeting him. I asked him where the others were, where David and Jennifer and Barbara and Richard and Karen had gone, what had happened that night in the campsite. He was silent for a long time. Then he said something that I have been trying to make sense of ever since. He said that they were still there, not in the campsite, but in the mountains, still there, still in the high places, still being hunted. I asked him what he meant. I asked him where they were. I asked him if they were alive. He said that the question was not whether they were alive in the way that I understood alive. He said that they had been taken to a different place, a place that existed in the mountains but not quite in the physical mountains. He said that the Thunderers had brought them to that place. They were still conscious, still aware, but they were not moving. They were not trying to escape. It was as if they had been suspended in some state between living and dying. And William said something that made my blood go cold. He said that he was the only one who had managed to escape that place, and he had only managed to escape because the Thunderers had let him leave. They had wanted him to leave. They had wanted someone to survive and tell the story. I asked him why. Why would they want someone to survive and tell the story? William stood up from the rock. As he stood, the wind picked up. The trees began to sway, even though there were no strong gusts, even though the wind should not have been sufficient to move the branches that way. William said that the Thunderers were hunters. That was their nature. They hunted in the mountains during storms, but they hunted more than animals. They had always hunted humans. They had learned, over centuries, to understand human behavior. They had learned that humans were drawn to challenge themselves, drawn to the wild places, drawn to danger. And they had learned that the best way to continue their hunt was to ensure that humans kept coming to the mountains, that they kept ignoring the warnings, that they kept coming back, generation after generation, drawn by curiosity or adventure or disbelief. And William said that the only way to ensure that continued was to make sure that at least one survivor got away, that at least one person lived to tell the story. Because the stories kept people interested, the stories kept the mystery alive. The stories made people want to come to the mountains and solve the mystery themselves. The Thunderers were not trying to eliminate human beings from the mountains. They were cultivating them. the way a rancher cultivates cattle. I felt my body go numb as he said this. I felt like my legs might not hold my weight. William walked toward me, and with every step he took, the wind grew stronger. The temperature dropped. I could see clouds forming above us, even though the weather system was still miles away. William said that he could not stay long. He said that the connection between him and the place where the others had gone was starting to weaken. He said that soon he would have to go back, and this time, when he went back, he would not be coming out again. I asked him what he meant. I asked him if he was going to jump into the creek or something, if he was going to hurt himself. He said no. He said that the Thunderers would come for him. They had planted something in him that night, something that was still growing. He could feel it in his body. He could feel it changing him, converting him. Soon he would no longer be human. Soon he would be something else. And as William was telling me this, the sky above us began to change. The clouds that were forming took on a strange quality. They started to move in patterns, spirals, geometric shapes, as if they were following some invisible current of air, some design that existed outside of normal meteorology. And in the distance, I heard the sound of thunder. But it was not normal thunder. It sounded like it was moving, like it was coming from multiple directions at once. And underneath the thunder, I heard something else. That sound like voices. That twisted approximation of language that I had heard in the ranger station during the storm. William looked up at the sky, and on his face I saw something that might have been joy or recognition. He said that they were calling for him. He said it was time for him to go back. I asked him one last question. I asked him if there was any way to stop it, any way to make the Thunderers stop hunting in the mountains, any way to make them go away. William looked at me with those hollow eyes, and he said something that I have never told anyone. He said that the Thunderers were not really hunting us. They were inviting us to something. They were calling us to transformation. And the reason that people kept coming to the mountains, the reason that the stories kept spreading, was because deep down, on some level that most people were not consciously aware of, some human beings wanted to answer that call. Some part of humanity wanted to transform, wanted to become something other than what we are. And that hunger, William said, was what the Thunderers were really feeding on. Then William began to walk away from me. He walked toward the trees. The wind was so strong by that point that I could barely stand. The clouds above us were roiling and twisting. The thunder was growing louder, and in the distance, visible for just a moment in a flash of lightning, I saw the shape. The Thunderer shape. The thing that had taken the hikers. It was descending from the clouds. I turned and ran for my truck. I did not look back. I got in the truck and started the engine and drove away from Hollow Creek at speeds that I did not think the vehicle was capable of achieving. In my mirror, I saw the lightning strike the ground where William had been standing. Not once, but repeatedly. Strike after strike, the sky lighting up like daylight. And in that repeated illumination, I saw the massive shape descending. I saw arms extending. I saw what might have been claws opening. I did not see what happened to William. But I knew that whatever was happening, it was not something that a human body was meant to survive. I drove all the way back to Ridgeton without stopping. When I reached my house, I locked the doors and closed the curtains. I did not answer my phone when it rang. I sat in the darkness and listened to the storm that followed me home. The storm that seemed to follow me across the landscape. The storm that seemed determined to get at me. But I was not in the high places. I was not in the mountains where the Thunderers hunt. And they did not come for me. By morning the storm had passed. When I finally left my house and went to work, I learned that my supervisor had been calling me. A ranger on patrol near Hollow Creek had found my truck and had called in my location when I was reported missing. Another ranger had driven to the area and had found me at my house. My supervisor asked me where I had been. I told him that I had received an emergency call on my personal cell phone. I told him that I had gone to Hollow Creek to investigate. I did not tell him about William Anderson. I did not tell him about the conversation or the shape in the sky or the lightning strikes. I told him that by the time I got there it was dark and stormy, and I had decided to leave and come back to town. I said I had not answered my phone because I was driving and the weather was dangerous. He seemed to accept that story, though I could tell he did not entirely believe it. The official search for William Anderson was called off after 2 weeks. His body was never found. There were no remains. There was no evidence that he had ever been at Hollow Creek, except for my testimony. And I had deliberately not mentioned the meeting to anyone except my supervisor, and I had made it sound accidental and inconsequential. The assumption was that William had either committed suicide or had simply disappeared into the wilderness and was no longer alive. There were obituaries published. His family held a memorial service. The final missing person from the original hiking group was declared deceased, presumed dead. The file was closed. But William was not dead. Or rather, he was not the kind of dead that we understand. Because in the months that followed, there were more sightings. People reported seeing a figure moving through the high places of the mountains during storms, a figure that moved in an unnatural way, a figure that seemed to bend and twist incorrectly. Some people who reported seeing this figure said that it was wearing clothes that looked like they might be the hiking outfit that William Anderson had been wearing on the day he went missing. And there were other reports of shapes in the clouds during storms, reports of voices in the thunder, reports of shadows that moved independently of any light source. The sightings continued throughout the fall and winter, and then in spring, when the weather began to warm up and storms became more common, the sightings increased. By the summer after the original disappearances, the pattern had become unavoidable. People were going missing in the Appalachian Mountains at a rate that was significantly higher than the historical average. Hikers, campers, hunters, people who ventured into the high places during storms and did not return. The Park Service could no longer deny that something was wrong. Official investigations were launched. Federal agencies became involved. Search teams were dispatched. Thousands of man-hours were spent looking for the missing people, and they found nothing. No bodies, no remains, no signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened to any of the missing people. But the disappearances continued. I have been a ranger in these mountains for nearly 20 years now. I have watched the situation evolve and worsen. I have watched as theories have come and gone. Bear attacks, serial killers, paranormal phenomena, environmental hazards, disappearances caused by misadventure or accident. All of these explanations have been offered at various times. None of them fit the evidence. None of them explain the patterns. I know what has happened. I know what is happening. The Thunderers have always been here. They have always hunted in the mountains during storms. But in recent years, their hunting has become more aggressive, more direct. Or perhaps it is not that they have become more aggressive, but rather that more people are coming to the mountains, and the Thunderers are simply taking advantage of an increased food supply. Or perhaps it is something else entirely. Perhaps William was telling the truth. Perhaps the Thunderers are not hunting us for food or for sport, but for something more fundamental. Perhaps they are trying to draw us into transformation, converting us into something other than human, creating a hybrid species. A new kind of being that exists partially in our world and partially in whatever other realm the Thunderers inhabit. I do not know which explanation is correct. I do not know what the Thunderers truly want, but I know that it is not safe to be in the high places during storms. I know that it is not safe to venture into the mountains alone. I know that there are things in these mountains that should not be encountered. And I know that if you are reading this story, and if you are even considering coming to the Appalachian Mountains to hike or camp, you need to understand something very important. The disappearances will continue. The Thunderers will continue to hunt. And every time someone goes missing, every time a hiker fails to return, every time a body cannot be found, another thread in the pattern is woven into the tapestry of mystery that keeps people coming back to these mountains. Another story is created, another legend is born, and that legend draws more people, more adventurers, more thrill-seekers who want to see if they can survive what the mountains have to offer. And when they arrive, when they venture into the high places during a storm, when they find themselves suddenly alone in the darkness with lightning above and the sound of thunder that sounds almost like screaming, they will hear a voice. It might sound like the wind. It might sound like their own thoughts. But it will be there, and that voice will be asking them a question. Do you want to know what the mountains are hiding? Do you want to understand what is moving in the sky? Do you want to be more than human? And some people will say no. Some people will run. Some people will make it out of the mountains and go back to their normal lives and never return. But some people will say yes. Some people will be drawn to that transformation. Some people will want to become something other than what they are. And those people will not leave the mountains. Those people will stay in the high places. Those people will join the Thunderers. They will become part of the hunt, and the cycle will continue. I am telling this story because I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to understand what is really happening in these mountains. Whether that someone is you, the reader, or the people who come after you, I do not know. But I know that the story needs to be told. I know that the warning needs to be given. Stay out of the mountains during storms. Stay in the low places. Respect the wilderness. Ignore the call if you hear it. Do not go looking for the thunderers. Do not try to capture them on film or photograph them or document them for social media or any other reason. Because if you do, they will notice you. And once they notice you, they will not stop hunting you. They will track you. They will follow you down from the mountains. They will pursue you until you are forced to make a choice. Accept their transformation or spend the rest of your life running. I have made my choice. I have chosen to stay in the mountains. I have chosen to warn people. I have chosen to accept that I will never truly be at peace, knowing what I know, seeing what I have seen. But I do not regret that choice, because the alternative would be to go on pretending that nothing strange is happening in these mountains, to go on watching people die without speaking, to go on living a lie. So I am telling this story. I am giving this warning, and I am hoping that someone will listen, that someone will understand, that the pattern will be broken. But even as I write these final words, I am listening to the storm brewing outside my window. I am watching the clouds form above the distant ridge. I am hearing the sound of thunder in the distance, and I wonder if it is calling for me. I wonder if my time in the mountains is finally coming to an end. I wonder if the thunderers are patient enough to let a story be told before they collect their debt. I have always known that I would end up going back to the mountains, that eventually I would venture into the high places during a storm, that eventually I would have to face whatever has been hunting in these mountains. I am ready for that moment. I have made my peace with it. All I ask is that if something should happen to me, if I should disappear like the others, someone will read this story and understand why. Someone will know that I was not careless or foolish. I was understanding. There are things in these mountains that predate human civilization, things that exist in the spaces between our world and other worlds, things that hunt, and things that are patient, and things that will continue to hunt long after we are all gone. The thunderers ride the storms of the Appalachian Mountains. They have always ridden them. They will continue to ride them. And as long as there are storms, and as long as there are people foolish enough to venture into the high places during those storms, the hunt will continue, and the mountains will never be truly silent again. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the story of what I have seen and what I know to be true. Take it or leave it. Believe it or dismiss it. Come to the mountains or stay away. The choice is yours. But know that somewhere in these mountains, in the highest places, when the storms roll in and the thunder sounds like voices, the thunderers are watching, waiting, hunting, and they are always hungry.